Welcome to Terrified Tales, where things are about to get unsettling. Before we dive deeper into the darkness, make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you brave enough to be here at night? Now, relax and let the fear take hold. Story 1. The air in the car was heavy with the promise of something more than just a weekend getaway. Maya glanced at her friends in the back seat, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. The rain had started falling in steady drips, a light mist clinging to the windshield like the veil of something ancient. It wasn't enough to obstruct their view, but enough to make the trees lining the road look like vague, haunting figures, silent, sentinels guarding something unseen. "Are you sure about this?" Eli's voice was playful, but there was an edge to it. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a nervous tick he couldn't seem to shake. "Come on," Maya replied, her voice steady, almost too steady, as if she was trying to convince herself. "It'll be fun. A weekend in nature. No distractions, just us." "Yeah, no distractions. Except maybe the ghost stories the locals like to whisper about this place," Ava chimed in, her voice light, but with a knowing glint in her eyes. "You did hear about the Whispering Woods, right?" Maya let out a half laugh, brushing it off. "It's just a legend, ghost stories, people exaggerate. Besides, we could all use a little adventure, don't you think?" Jonas, who had been quietly staring out of the window, spoke up from the back seat, his voice tinged with caution. "I've heard the stories. The people in the town, they're serious about it. Something about the trees, the land. Like they're watching. I don't know. Feels like they've got a reason for those superstitions." Maya's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she navigated the winding mountain road. She had heard the rumors. Who hadn't? But she wasn't about to let that stop her. She wasn't one for believing in fairy tales or folklore. Still, as the car climbed higher into the mountains, something in the back of her mind whispered, doubts she couldn't shake. "Don't worry," Maya said, attempting to inject some humor into her tone. "We'll be fine. We've got the whole weekend to escape our hectic lives and just breathe. Plus, the worst thing that could happen is we get caught in a storm and end up trapped inside the cabin for a few extra hours." She smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Jonas, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "Trapped inside a cabin, surrounded by rain, in the middle of a forest that's older than most cities. Yeah, sounds great." The others laughed, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Even in the dim light of the car, it was obvious that everyone was feeling a bit uneasy. The road narrowed as they entered the heart of the forest, the towering trees on either side casting long, dark shadows that seemed to creep toward the vehicle, like ghostly fingers. The trees themselves felt ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out to grab them. The rain was no longer a light mist. It was a constant, heavy downpour that struck the windshield with a soft, persistent rhythm. Maya turned the wheel sharply, making a hard right turn onto a narrow dirt road leading further into the woods. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, and despite herself, she found herself glancing nervously into the rearview mirror. "Do you guys feel that?" Ava asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Eli responded, sounding more irritated than worried. "Like we're being watched," Ava said, her eyes darting nervously to the dense trees surrounding them. "I don't know, just a weird vibe." Maya glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the road behind them was empty, save for the occasional flash of headlights reflecting off the wet ground. There was nothing but the sound of the rain tapping against the roof. "Come on, stop being paranoid," she said, though even to her own ears, the words felt hollow. The cabin appeared suddenly, almost as if it had materialized out of the forest mist. Its silhouette was dark against the grey sky, looming just beyond the tree line. The wooden structure was weather-beaten, its once bright paint long since faded to a dull, sickly color. There was a forlorn look to it, abandoned yet somehow still standing, as though it were holding its breath, waiting. "This is it," Maya said, her voice barely audible as she pulled up to the cabin. "Our little escape." They unloaded the car in silence, the sound of the rain deafening as it cascaded from the roof in sheets. The forest around them seemed to breathe, the trees shifting slightly, as if they were alive. The feeling of being watched was stronger now, so much so that it was impossible to ignore. As they settled inside the cabin, the walls creaked with age, settling under the weight of time and neglect. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting eerie shadows across the room. For a moment, the group tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over them, but it lingered, like a ghost in the air. "So," Maya said, trying to break the silence, "who wants to go hiking tomorrow? We've got a whole weekend to explore." Eli, trying to lighten the mood, grinned. "I'll pass on hiking if the trees are that into me." Ava joined in, though there was a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Maybe we can just stick to the paths tomorrow. We won't get lost, right?" Jonas, who had been staring into the fire, spoke up quietly. "It's not about getting lost. It's about what the forest does to you once you're in it." The room fell silent. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the stillness. Outside, the rain beat relentlessly against the cabin, but it was the quiet beyond the rain. That was more unsettling. Something about the forest felt wrong. Suddenly, a soft whisper, faint but unmistakable, carried through the room. The group froze. It wasn't the wind, it was something more. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Did anyone else hear that? The others nodded, but no one spoke. The whisper came. Again, this time louder. Maya, her name. It was her voice, or at least it sounded like it. The voice stops. Then, as they try to shake off the eerie feeling, they hear it again. But this time, it's not Maya's voice. It's someone else's. Someone they can't place. The voice calls again. "Maya." The group exchanged nervous glances, the room suddenly colder than it had been before, the warmth of the fire unable to chase away the unease that had settled over them. The cabin was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the steady patter of rain against the roof. But in that silence, a tension hung like a heavy fog. The whispering voice had vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving the group staring at each other, wide-eyed and unsure of what to say. No one wanted to be the first to break the stillness, to give voice to what they had just heard. Maya, still trying to grasp at reason, stood up from her seat near the fire and walked toward the window. Her breath fogged up the glass as she peered out into the dark forest, her eyes scanning the trees, but there was nothing. Only shadows stretched across the land, broken by the occasional flicker of lightning that illuminated the vast expanse of the woods. The air outside seemed thick, heavy with moisture and something else. "I thought I heard something," Maya muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. But the others heard. Eli, trying to keep the mood light, chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I'm sure it's just the wind. You know, old trees creak, and we're in the middle of nowhere." But Maya could see the uncertainty in Eli's eyes, the same fear creeping across his face that she was trying so hard to hide. They were all thinking the same thing, but none of them dared to say it out loud. The forest, it was alive. The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden walls of the cabin. A tree branch scraped against the window, making them all flinch. It sounded like fingers tapping, beckoning them to come out. Jonas, who had been silent for the last few moments, spoke up, his voice low and tinged with an unsettling calm. "I don't think we should stay here. Not tonight." Maya turned to look at him, her face filled with confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean we just got here?" Jonas shook his head. "No, I mean this place, this forest. It's not right. I've felt it since we got here. The trees, the air, the whispers. He paused, swallowing hard, as if even saying it aloud made the feeling more real. It's like it's watching us. Ava, who had been quiet up until now, stood from the couch, her eyes flickering nervously between the others. "I don't like it either," she admitted. "But I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. All the stories we heard in town." She trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence, but they all knew what she meant. The weight of those stories hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. The locals had warned them about the forest, about the whispers that came with the wind and the strange, things that had happened to people who had dared to wander too deep into it, legends of people who had disappeared without a trace, lost forever to the trees that seemed to have a life of their own. But none of them had truly believed it, not until now. "Maybe we should just stay here tonight," Maya suggested, though her voice lacked the usual conviction. "I'm sure it's just nerves. We've been on the road all day, and this place, it's so isolated. It's just strange, that's all." But deep down, Maya knew the others could feel it too. The wrongness that pressed in on them. The suffocating sensation that they had somehow crossed a boundary into something they couldn't understand. Jonas looked toward the fire, his face drawn and pale. "I don't know. The forest. It calls to you. I can feel it pulling at me." There it was again, the feeling they all shared. As much as they tried to rationalize it, the forest was no longer just a backdrop to their adventure. It was a living, breathing entity that was beginning to make its presence known. The storm outside picked up, the rain now pounding against the cabin like a relentless drumbeat. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Maya thought she saw something. Someone standing at the edge of the trees just beyond the window. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. Her heart raced as she pulled away from the window, turning back to face the group. "I thought I saw someone out there, in the woods." "Are you sure?" Eli asked, voice tight. Maya hesitated, uncertainty washing over her. Maybe it was just a shadow, I don't know. But even as she said it, she could feel a tremor of fear creeping up her spine. The shadows outside the window were moving, but they weren't the wind or the rain. It was something else, something that didn't belong. Suddenly, the fire flared in the hearth, casting an eerie glow across the room. The temperature dropped, the warmth of the flames doing nothing to dispel the chill that had settled over them. The air felt charged, thick with static, as if something invisible was building, waiting. The room fell into a heavy silence, the tension palpable. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside felt like a warning. The whispers from before started again, soft at first, like the wind brushing against the walls, but slowly growing louder, clearer. The sound of Maya's name, Maya. Her skin prickled, and for a moment, she swore she heard it again. This time, not just in the air, but inside her own mind. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's happening again." Eli's eyes widened as the whispers seemed to surround them, each voice distinct and yet blending together in an incoherent chorus. He bolted from his seat, running to the door. "No, I can't take this. I'm getting out of here." "Maya, stop him!" Ava cried as Eli reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling. But before Maya could say anything, Eli yanked the door open, and the moment the door cracked, the cold air from the outside rushed in, swirling with a wet, earthy smell. The whispers grew louder, now almost deafening, as though the entire forest was calling to him. He hesitated, stepping into the threshold, looking back at the others with fear in his eyes. "I need to see for myself. I need to know if this is real," Eli said, his voice shaking. But as he stepped outside, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that nearly knocked him off his feet. The room went completely still, the whispers dying away all at once, replaced by a haunting silence. Maya rushed to the door, heart pounding, only to find it locked. No matter how hard she tried, the door wouldn't budge. They could hear Eli's muffled voice outside, calling for help, his words indistinguishable from the wind. The forest had him now, and they were next. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of damp wood and the lingering smell of burning firewood. Maya's hand trembled against the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried desperately to open it. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to act, to help Eli, but the door wouldn't move. The once sturdy knob now felt as though it were rusted shut, as though the cabin itself had sealed her inside. "Eli!" Maya shouted, pounding on the door with her fists, her voice a mix of fear and desperation. But outside, the wind howled louder, drowning out her cries, and the whispers began to rise again, wrapping around her like a tightening noose. "Sapiko?" Whispers were different this time, though, more urgent, more insistent. They weren't just in the wind anymore. They were everywhere, surrounding her, inside her mind, calling to her like a distant, maddening echo. "Maya." She froze, her blood running cold. It was her voice, her very own voice, calling her name from the other side of the door. "Why does it feel like it's getting closer?" she whispered to herself, her body stiff with dread. She stepped back from the door, eyes darting around the room, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Ava rushed over to Maya's side, her face pale, her breath shallow. "What is happening? What's going on with Eli?" Her voice quivered, but it was clear that she was trying to keep her composure. "Why can't we open the door?" "I don't know," Maya replied, her words thick with panic. "I swear it was fine when we got here. But now I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. This place, it's..." Suddenly the door rattled, jerking Maya's attention back to it. The entire cabin seemed to groan under the pressure, like it was alive, twisting and shifting around them. "Maya." The voice, unmistakably hers, echoed again from outside. But this time, there was something else. Something new. It was layered with a deep, inhuman distortion, as if something was trying to mimic her voice, to impersonate her in ways she couldn't comprehend. Why is it saying my name?" she whispered, clutching at her chest. "What is it?" Jonas stood in the corner, his face pale and his eyes wide. "We need to get out of here," he said in a strained voice, almost too calm, his eyes reflecting the terror they all felt, but hadn't yet spoken. "The forest. It's not just watching, it's reaching for us." Maya stared at him, feeling a wave of disbelief wash over her. "What do you mean?" "The forest isn't real, it's just a bunch of trees." But Jonas shook his head slowly, his gaze flickering toward the windows where the storm raged. "It's not just the trees, the land, the ground beneath us. It's alive. And it remembers. It's calling to us, using our fears, our memories, to make us stay." "Stop," Ava cut in sharply, her voice filled with sudden panic. "I don't want to hear about the woods. I don't want to hear about any forest." But it was too late. A sudden gust of wind hit the cabin with such force that it shook the windows and rattled the doorframe. The wood groaned, as if protesting the intrusion, and then something moved inside the walls. It was subtle at first, like the faintest scratch followed by a deeper thud, as though something large had shifted in the darkness just beyond their sight. And then, from the farthest corner of the room, a new voice whispered, a low, drawn-out sound that slithered into their thoughts, soft and persistent, like a lover's call from a forgotten nightmare. "Maya, you cannot leave, not until we've played." Maya stumbled backward, her legs giving way beneath her. She collapsed onto the couch, clutching her head as though she could block out the sound, the noise that now seemed to come from everywhere. Her thoughts became tangled, and her body was frozen in fear. "Did anyone else hear that?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a breath. Jonas nodded, his lips drawn tight in fear. "It's the forest. It's pulling at us, getting stronger." "We have to get out of here," Maya said, now feeling the overwhelming pull of the voice inside her head. She forced herself to her feet, looking wildly around the cabin. "We need to find a way, Maya." The voice came again, now all around them, echoing from every corner of the room. The fire crackled loudly in the hearth, but the room felt as if it had grown colder still, as if the very essence of the cabin was shifting, rearranging itself, making space for something that shouldn't be there. Ava bolted for the door again, her hands trembling as she gripped the knob, but the door refused to open once more. It was as if it was locked from the outside, or perhaps it was more than that. It was as if the forest had claimed the cabin as its own, and now no one was allowed to leave. "Why won't it open?" Ava screamed, her voice breaking as she pulled harder at the knob. Then a strange noise, a distant, unnatural hum, low and rhythmic, like something trying to grow, to expand. The walls of the cabin seemed to shudder in response to the sound. Maya's breath hitched as she glanced toward the back of the room, where a shadow seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally long. No, not yet. The voice from the dark corners of the room crooned softly. The shadow moved again, and this time it was unmistakable. It was in the shape of a figure, tall, gaunt, and covered in what appeared to be moss and bark. Its eyes were hollow, voids of blackness, with no hint of light or humanity. It was standing still in the farthest corner of the room, and Maya couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. "I see you, Maya," the shadow whispered, its voice chillingly familiar, as if it had once been someone she knew. The darkness wrapped around the edges of the room like a net closing in. The air grew suffocatingly thick, as if the forest was pouring into the room itself, its wet earth and dense atmosphere filling every corner. Ava and Jonas screamed, but Maya could barely hear them over the deafening silence that had descended, broken only by the rhythmic hum that was growing louder, stronger, feeding the growing darkness. The figure stepped forward, its presence filling the room as the air thickened. The whispers grew into an insistent roar. "Maya, come closer." The room felt like it was folding in on them. The forest had claimed its first victim, and she could already feel it trying to pull her in. The air in the cabin felt suffocating, the walls closing in as if the house itself was no longer a structure but a living, breathing entity, its heartbeat echoing in the rhythm of the whispers. The forest was everywhere now, its shadows, its voices, its presence, and no matter how hard they tried, the group couldn't escape its pull. Every corner of the room seemed to warp with the same malevolent energy that had first drawn them here. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to process the growing horror. The shadow standing in the corner, its eyes hollow, its form, a grotesque silhouette of bark and twisted branches, had not moved. Yet its presence felt like it had consumed the entire room. Every creak of the floorboards beneath their feet, every gust of wind outside, seemed to push them closer to that dark corner, closer to the thing that watched them without blinking. The whispers intensified, now layered with low growls, murmurs, and laughter that was not human. The voice calling her name had changed, no longer just a distorted echo of her own voice, but something more insidious, as though it had taken on the voice of the forest itself. "Maya, we're waiting for you." Her legs felt like they were made of stone, each step toward the door a Herculean effort. She reached for the knob again, her hands trembling, but it wouldn't budge. The door, just like everything else, felt impossibly heavy, as though it had been locked, not just from the outside, but by some invisible force, something that wanted her to stay. "Eli," Maya gasped, her voice thin. "Where is Eli? What happened to him?" Jonas, who who had been standing frozen near the hearth, his face pale and covered in sweat, shook his head slowly, his voice quivering. "I don't know. I think the forest has him, or something else. I can feel it, Maya. It's calling to me, to all of us. And if we don't leave now, it will take us too." Ava's eyes darted around the room, her breathing shallow. She backed up slowly, her gaze fixated on the shadow in the corner. What is that thing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadow seemed to shift, its form elongating and twisting. The figure, it wasn't just a shadow anymore, was slowly growing more distinct, its features becoming clearer. Branches curled outward from its back like twisted wings, its arms gnarled with bark, and its head was crowned with antler-like protrusions. It was no longer merely a shape in the corner. It was a presence, a terror that seemed to fill the room with an ancient malice. And then for the briefest moment, Maya thought she saw its face, a face that was too familiar to be just a trick of the shadows. It looked like her own reflection, but wrong, twisted, as if it had been pulled from the darkest parts of her mind. "Not yet, Maya," the voice growled, and it was the forest's voice now, her voice, their voice. "The forest has claimed you, and you belong here now." Ava gasped, stumbling backward, nearly tripping over the old rug in the center of the room. "We need to get out of here, now!" But there was no escape. Suddenly, the room around them began to shift. The walls didn't, just creak. They groaned as if the very bones of the cabin were shifting, warping. The windows that once offered a view of the storm outside were now covered in a thick, opaque mist, and the shadows grew longer, twisting into unnatural shapes. The fireplace flickered wildly, casting monstrous shapes on the walls, and the air grew dense with a suffocating weight, as if the house were breathing, alive, hungry. "You are the last to play. The others have already joined," the voice hissed, echoing in their heads. The ground beneath them seemed to hum, alive, with energy as the air thickened further, pressing against them with a palpable force. The group scrambled, their fear now tangible. Jonas turned to look at the walls, at the once pristine wood that was now covered in runes, strange symbols that weren't there before. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, like veins beneath the surface, pulsing with dark energy. And as they looked closer, they realized something even more disturbing. The symbols were moving. "Those weren't here before," Jonas shouted, panic rising in his voice. The symbols began to shift and swirl, converging toward a central point, the heart of the cabin. And then, as if drawn by an unseen force, they melted into the floor, disappearing as though they were never there. But the forest's grip wasn't over yet. The door they had tried to open earlier, suddenly swung wide open, but it wasn't to freedom. Through the frame, the group saw nothing but a suffocating fog, the trees outside now twisted and distorted, their branches reaching inward like grotesque claws, grasping for them. The very air outside seemed to writhe, like it was alive and pressing in on them. And then, without warning, the forest spoke again. "Join us, Maya. You will never leave. You are mine." The voice was unmistakable, undeniable. It was the forest itself, now fully alive, and it had chosen them. Or perhaps it had always chosen them. The whispers, the footsteps, the shadows, they had been leading them here all along, drawing them deeper into the ancient grip of the forest's curse. The shadow figure, now fully materialized in the room, stepped forward. Its hollow eyes bore into Maya, and she felt the ground beneath her shift, pulling her down as if the earth itself was hungry. A powerful, unseen force pushed her toward it, her body trembling, her feet unsteady, as if some invisible hand was dragging her toward the darkness. The shadow figure reached out with an arm of twisted bark, its fingers extending toward Maya. She felt a surge of panic, but her body moved, as though it had no will of its own. The last thing she heard was the voice, low and guttural, whispering in her ear, "It's time to play." Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she was pulled toward the figure. Her limbs felt heavy, as though every movement was being forced upon her, controlled by an unseen power. She tried to fight it, but her body refused to obey. Her feet dragged across the floor, and as her gaze lifted toward the figure in the corner, she saw that it was no longer a mere shadow. It had fully taken shape. Its eyes, dark and hollow, were locked onto hers, pulling her in, drawing her closer with an oppressive, suffocating pull. The air around her felt thick, with something ancient, something hungry, and Maya felt herself weakening, as though the forest's very breath was stealing the energy from her. "Maya." The figure spoke again, its voice now a guttural rasp. The words twisted and distorted, like they came from the earth itself. "You belong to me now." The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows deepening, as if the forest outside was bleeding into the cabin. The temperature dropped, and Maya's breath became visible in the cold air. She stumbled, her legs finally refusing to carry her further, and she collapsed to the floor, the force pulling at her still relentless. "Stop it!" Ava cried, her voice cracking with desperation. She rushed forward, trying to reach Maya, but as she did, the floorboards seemed to shift beneath her feet. The ground buckled, creaking loudly, as if the very structure of the cabin was bending, warping under the pressure of the forest's will. Jonas, too, was paralyzed. He reached for Maya, his face contorted with fear and anger. But as his fingers brushed the air, the shadows around them flickered and twisted, forming dark tendrils that reached toward him like fingers, pulling him backward with unnatural strength. "No." "We can't let it take her," Jonas shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the sudden, overwhelming presence of the forest. Ava's attempts to help were just as futile. As she tried to move closer to Maya, the walls of the cabin seemed to close in around her, the windows darkening as if the entire world outside had been shut out. There was no sound now, no wind, no rain. Just the haunting silence of the forest, pressing down on them like a weight that they couldn't escape. And then they heard it, the soft scraping of footsteps. At first it was faint, barely perceptible over the eerie stillness. But as the seconds ticked by, the sound grew louder, clearer, and then they saw them. Figures, flickering at the edges of the room, translucent, shifting like wisps of smoke. They were the spirits of the forest, twisted and disfigured by the earth itself. They were the lost souls of those who had entered the woods before, people who had never come back, their lives consumed by the curse of the land. Now, they were nothing more than shadows, pale reflections of their former selves, bound to the forest for eternity. One of them stepped forward, its face covered in dirt and vines, its eyes empty hollows. "Maya," it whispered, its voice hollow and distant. "We were once like you, lost. Now we are bound to the woods. We have been waiting for you." Maya's eyes widened with horror as she realized what they were. The forest didn't just trap people, it transformed them, bound their spirits to the land. It was feeding off their fear, using them to strengthen its grip. "We wait for you," the spirits whispered again, their voices overlapping, each one vying for attention. "You can't leave, not anymore." Maya could barely breathe as she tried to scramble backward, her arms shaking. She reached out to grab hold of the nearest object, anything to anchor herself to reality. But there was nothing. The shadows and figures pressed closer, and as they did, she felt a cold hand, not human, graze her shoulder, sending a bolt of ice through her spine. "Stop!" Ava screamed, but her voice was a mere tremor in the vast, suffocating silence of the cabin. The spirits closed in around them, their forms becoming more tangible, their ghostly fingers brushing against their skin. One of the figures, an old man with hollow eyes, reached out and touched Jonas's arm. He flinched, his body going rigid as the air around him grew colder, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "No, no," Jonas cried, pulling away, but the spirit clung to him, its grip unyielding. "Let go of me." But the spirit wouldn't release him. It was as if the figure's very touch was draining him, pulling his life force away, and Maya watched in horror as his skin grew pale, his breath slowing, as if the very essence of him was being siphoned into the ground beneath them. "You're next, Jonas," the spirit's voice rasped. "The forest needs you too." The air in the room thickened, and the temperature plummeted further, turning their breath into frosty clouds. Maya gasped as the forest's power continued to press against them, suffocating them. The floor beneath her was no longer solid. It felt like it was shifting, moving with a rhythm that was not of the earth. She felt the ground beneath her crack, and the floorboards groaned, splitting wide as roots and vines began to push up from below, wrapping around her legs, pulling her deeper into the earth. Ava screamed as she watched Maya being consumed by the roots, her body trembling in fear. "We have to do something." But as Ava moved toward her, the spirits gathered in front of her, blocking her path. They weren't just phantoms anymore. They were the forest's wrath, and they would not let anyone escape. Their faces twisted in torment, mouths open in silent screams, each one reaching for the living, trying to drag them into the depths of the cursed land. Maya's body was halfway submerged in the earth when the shadows, now swirling with dark energy, turned toward Ava and Jonas. The forest wasn't just claiming them, it was testing their resolve. "Do you want to play?" the spirits whispered. "Or will you surrender?" The room spun around them, the ground beneath them shifting, and with a final heart-wrenching scream, Maya vanished beneath the earth's surface. Maya was gone. The realization hit like a wave, suffocating and cold. She had been pulled into the earth, consumed by the very forest that had called them here. The floor beneath them was now a shifting mass of roots and vines, pulling at their feet, and the walls seemed to bend and warp with the same malice as the shadowy figures that had gathered in the cabin. Ava stood frozen, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. She couldn't accept that Maya was gone. She could still feel her presence faintly in the air around her, but it was fading. The whispers had grown louder since Maya disappeared, now a cacophony of voices, some familiar, others strange, calling to them from every direction. They all seemed to say the same thing: "Join us, join us. You will never leave." Jonas, his face pale and covered in sweat, was shaking uncontrollably. He had never seen anything like this, not even in his worst nightmares. The spirits had consumed him with their touch, draining him of his strength, and now he felt as though he were being stretched, pulled into the same void that had claimed Maya. His legs felt weak, like they would buckle beneath him, but his mind was still working, still grasping for some kind of escape. We need to get out," Jonas gasped, his voice hoarse. He looked around desperately, his eyes wild. "We can't stay here, we can't." Ava looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and growing resolve. "What do you think is happening, Jonas? The forest isn't going to let us leave." Her voice was quiet, yet there was a dangerous edge to it now. She wasn't going to run anymore, not when Maya was gone, not when it seemed like they were already lost. The room around them continued to warp. The walls weren't just creaking now, they were groaning in pain, as though the house itself was suffering from the forest's curse. Roots pushed through the cracks in the walls, snaking their way through the air, and the air itself seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The temperature had dropped so much that their breaths turned to mist. A low, reverberating growl filled the room. It came not from the forest outside, but from inside, from deep within the earth itself, beneath the cabin. The ground quivered under their feet, and the forest's pulse grew stronger, more rhythmic, as though something was awakening beneath the soil. The shadowy figures, the spirits, moved closer, their faces now fully visible. They were not mere shadows anymore. They had form, shape, and purpose. But their faces were twisted, disfigured by the curse of the land, their eyes filled with endless hunger. These were the souls of the lost, but they were not simply trapped in the forest. They had become part of it, and now it seemed they were here to collect more souls to feed the forest's ancient hunger. "You are the last ones," one of the spirits whispered, its voice an eerie blend of Maya's and something older, more primordial. "The last to join the forest, to become part of the cycle." Jonas stumbled backward, his mind racing. He had to find a way out. They had to find a way to stop this. The rituals, the stories, the symbols. He had heard about old rituals, dark practices that could bind souls to the land. The spirits, they had to have been bound this way. "Wait," Jonas said, his voice barely audible over the rising din of the voices around them. The ritual, the burial ground beneath the house, that's what it was, right? The forest, it needs a sacrifice, but what kind of sacrifice? Ava's eyes narrowed. "Sacrifice? What are you talking about?" "The ritual," Jonas repeated, his hands shaking. "It's the only way. The house, the land, it's all connected. The spirits, they're trapped here because of the ritual. But if we reverse it, we might be able to stop the forest from claiming us, from pulling us into the earth." Ava's stomach twisted with dread. Could they really do that? Could they even survive whatever this forest wanted? The spirits seemed to sense their hesitation. The temperature plummeted even further, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Ava felt the floor shift, and before she could react, a vine shot up from the ground, wrapping around her ankle, pulling her toward the center of the room, where a dark, swirling abyss seemed to open in the floor. "Join us." The voice was now a chorus, thousands of spirits singing in unison. "Become one with the forest." Ava screamed, her hands scrambling for purchase as the vine tugged harder. The darkness below her seemed to beckon, a yawning mouth ready to swallow her whole. "No!" Jonas shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. He rushed toward Ava, reaching down and grabbing her hand. But the pull from the forest was too strong. The darkness below them seemed to open wider, swallowing everything in its path. Ava's vision blurred with tears as the world seemed to collapse around her. The room spun, the spirits' voices growing louder and louder, the forest's malevolent pulse pounding in her ears. "Maya," the voice of the spirit whispered, so close that Ava could feel its breath on her skin. "You are here. Forever." Jonas wasn't going to let this happen. He pulled at Ava's hand with everything he had, but the vine had wrapped around her legs now, its grip tight, its roots digging deeper into the floor. The ground around them began to rumble again, and then, through the cacophony of whispers and growls, Jonas heard it, a faint, distant sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep below them. A low hum, a strange chant. It sounded like the words were being spoken in unison by the spirits, as though the ritual was beginning. Ava's eyes widened as she heard it too. The ritual was starting. The forest had awakened something ancient beneath them, and they were at the heart of it now. The pulse of the earth beneath them became faster, harder. Jonas had no choice. He pulled Ava's hand tighter, trying to break the vine's hold, but it was too strong. Then the ground split open. Ava screamed as the floor cracked open beneath them, the earth below giving way to an endless abyss. The Spirits' voices filled the cabin, singing their unholy chant, and the forest's hum grew louder. But as the darkness consumed them, Jonas spotted something in the distance, something shimmering, flickering like a faint light at the edge of the abyss. Could it be the heart of the forest, the source of its power? Or was it too late for them to escape? The ground beneath Jonas and Ava cracked open like a yawning mouth, the abyss below them stretching deeper and deeper into the earth. The shrill wails of the spirits surrounded them, becoming a constant drone, as though the forest itself was, whispering its hunger, eager to devour them whole. Ava's heart raced, her mind clouded with panic. She struggled, trying to pull free from the vines that coiled tightly around her ankles, but they only tightened, dragging her closer to the dark, swirling maw of the earth. "No!" she screamed, her voice choked with fear. "Help me, please, Jonas." Jonas, his hands trembling, reached out desperately, grabbing her wrist with a strength that felt like it was running out. His body screamed with exhaustion, the strain of holding on to her as the darkness closed in, threatening to tear him apart. But there was something more than exhaustion now, a sensation creeping through his limbs, a coldness that wasn't the chill of the air, but something deeper, something unnatural. It felt like the forest was reaching into him, trying to consume his very soul. "Hold on," Jonas shouted, his voice hoarse, but the words barely made it past his lips. He could feel the pull of the earth beneath them, the shadows closing in, and the weight of 1,000 lost souls pressing down on him. But just as Ava was about to be swallowed by the gaping earth, something happened. The forest paused. The pull of the vines, the darkness in the ground, it all stopped, leaving the group suspended in a moment of sheer terror. The hum from the earth slowed, the rhythmic chanting of the spirits faded, as if something deeper was taking shape beneath them. Jonas felt his heart race, his breath shallow, and for a fleeting moment the shadows around him flickered, as if they were listening to him. Then, suddenly, the spirits' voices shifted. The soothing, maddening chorus that had encircled them now became discordant, disjointed. The shadows pulsed violently, the forms of the spirits twisting, stretching, warping. And that's when Jonas saw it, the source of the forest's power, the heart. It wasn't buried in the ground like he had thought. No, it was part of the cabin itself. It was in the very walls, in the air they breathed, in the soil beneath them. The trees outside had been a mere extension of this living entity, a dark, breathing presence that was tied to everything around them. But now, its heart was exposed, pulsing, beating with an unnatural rhythm that seemed to echo in his skull. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a being, ancient, immortal, and infinitely hungry. Jonas's thoughts turned to the rituals he had uncovered, the dark practices that bound the spirits to the earth, to the forest. These rituals, meant to trap souls forever, were not just for appeasing the forest, but to feed it. The sacrifice wasn't just to protect the land, it nourished it. It fed the forest's unyielding hunger. And now, the forest was reaching for them, ready to consume them as it had consumed countless others before. Ava's screams pierced through Jonas's thoughts, snapping him back to the present. The vines were tightening, dragging her lower into the earth. His mind raced as he fought, to keep her from being swallowed by the earth. But the forest was relentless, and in the chaos, Jonas saw something that chilled him to the bone. Ava's skin, where the vine touched, was starting to change. Her body was becoming part of the forest, her limbs stiffening, her fingers curling into root-like shapes. Ava was beginning to transform. "Ava!" Jonas cried, shaking her, but her face had already begun to lose its human shape. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, but her features were beginning to blur, merging with the very essence of the forest. The roots, the vines, they weren't just pulling at her. They were integrating her into the earth, into the forest. Jonas's mind reeled, but the realization was unmistakable. The forest didn't just claim souls. It changed them, transforming them into something else, something new, and in the process, it fed on their very essence. "You will become one with us." The voice of the spirits echoed in unison, their words wrapping around Jonas like a noose. "Maya has joined us. You will join us too." The walls of the cabin seemed to vibrate with the force of the forest's power, and Jonas knew they were running out of time. The transformation had begun. Ava was already halfway to becoming something else, something monstrous. And if they didn't stop it now, they'd both be lost. "No!" Jonas shouted, his voice desperate as he pulled harder on Ava's hand. But she wasn't responding. The light in her eyes was fading, her body twitching violently as the forest's grip tightened around her. Suddenly, an ancient guttural voice spoke directly into Jonas's mind. "The heart is yours to claim," it hissed. "You may stop it, if you dare, but at what cost?" Jonas staggered back as the words hit him, his breath shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. The forest was offering him a way out, but at a terrible price. He could feel the dark pulse of the heart. It was calling to him, urging him to claim it. If he could destroy it, maybe, just maybe, he could save Ava and save himself. But the cost would be great. "What will you sacrifice?" The voice echoed, cruel and mocking. "Your life? Your soul? Or will you offer her?" Ava let out a strangled gasp, and Jonas could feel the pain radiating from her. She was no longer herself, no longer Ava. She was becoming part of the forest, and every second he waited would pull her deeper into the abyss. The forest's hum grew louder, as though it had sensed Jonas's decision. The walls of the cabin shifted, and the floor beneath them cracked open wider, the ground beneath them quaking. Jonas had no time left. He looked into Ava's fading eyes, her body nearly fully transformed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he made his choice. "I will destroy it," he whispered to himself, feeling the weight of the decision crash over him. "I will stop this," but the forest had no intention of letting him go that easily. Jonas reached for the heart beneath the cabin, feeling the intense pulse of the forest beneath his fingers. But as his hand made contact with the dark, beating core, he was flooded with visions. Visions of the countless souls the forest had consumed, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. And then a final, deafening roar filled the cabin as the forest unleashed its final, unyielding wrath. Was he too late? Was there any way to stop the cycle, or was he doomed to become another spirit, lost in the forest's grip forever? Jonas's hand hovered over the pulsing heart beneath the cabin, the air around him thick with dread. His fingers trembled as he reached for the dark, beating core of the forest, the very source of its power. The whispers in his mind grew louder, their voices becoming a maddening chorus, all urging him to take the final step. The pulse of the heart resonated deep within his chest, as if the forest was syncing with his heartbeat, urging him forward. For a moment, Jonas hesitated. The cost was overwhelming, the consequences of his actions unclear. But then he remembered Ava, her face, her voice, the way she had called out to him in terror before the vines had consumed her. She was lost, but there was still a sliver of hope. He could still save her. He had to. He took a deep breath, and with a surge of will, his hand made contact with the heart. The instant his skin touched the dark mass, an explosion of energy ripped through him, blinding white-hot pain searing through his entire body. The force of it was like nothing he had ever felt, a pain so intense it threatened to tear him apart from the inside out. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might pass out, but he held on, gritting his teeth through the agony. This was the only chance they had. The forest's pulse intensified, surging through him like wildfire, its power filling every part of his body. He could feel the ancient essence of the forest, the lost souls, the dark energy that had been feeding off the land for centuries. It wanted him. It needed him. And it was not going to let go easily. As he gripped the heart tighter, he saw flashes, visions of the past, the forest's history, its creation, its hunger. The spirits, trapped for eternity, bound by an ancient ritual that was meant to trap souls, but had only served to feed the insatiable hunger of the land. The ritual had been corrupted over time, its purpose twisted. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a living entity, a parasite feeding on the souls of the lost and the living alike. A cold, hollow voice echoed in his mind. "You cannot stop us. You belong to us now. This land is ours, and you are ours." Jonas gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. He couldn't give up. He couldn't let Ava become just another lost spirit in this forsaken place. The whispers grew louder, their voices becoming a cacophony of pleading, mocking, and angry tones. But Jonas pushed through it, focusing on one single thought: destroy it. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and the walls of the cabin began to distort. The forest's power, desperate to stop him, lashed out. The very air around Jonas seemed to twist, becoming thick with the force of the forest's fury. The vines around Ava's legs tightened, pulling harder, dragging her deeper into the earth, and the shadows of the spirits grew longer, reaching for Jonas as if to tear him apart. In that moment, Jonas made his choice. With one final, desperate effort, he yanked the heart from its place. The pulse beneath him faltered as the dark mass began to disintegrate in his hand. But its power didn't just vanish. It fought back, thrashing, sending shockwaves of energy through the cabin. The vines that had wrapped around Ava began to pulse, their roots digging deeper into her flesh, her body fusing with the earth, transforming into something unrecognizable. Ava screamed, her voice distorted by the forest's control, but the scream held a note of pleading. Her humanity was still fighting, but it was being slowly drowned out by the forest's insidious grip. Jonas collapsed to his knees, holding the now crumbling heart in his hands. The energy swirling around him was like a living thing, suffocating him, trying to tear him apart, but he could feel the connection to the heart weakening. It was working. The forest was weakening. Ava's body twitched violently, the transformation nearly complete. But then, just as Jonas thought it might be too late, a flash of light broke through the darkness. The cabin shook, and the vines around Ava's body loosened, her form still twisted, but no longer fully consumed. With a final surge of energy, Jonas hurled the heart into the center of the room. The moment it hit the ground, it exploded in a burst of light so bright it blinded him. The entire cabin trembled, groaning and cracking as the force of the explosion sent a shockwave through the walls. The heart was destroyed, and with its destruction, the power of the forest began to recede. The spirits let out a final, anguished scream, their forms dissolving into the air, their voices now nothing more than distant echoes. The earth beneath them stopped shaking, and the vines that had been pulling at Ava's body slithered away, retreating back into the ground. The oppressive air lightened, and the silence that followed was deafening. Ava's body remained motionless, but her breathing had slowed, her skin no longer turning to bark, no longer merging with the earth. She was still human, barely, but she was free. Jonas crawled over to her, his hands shaking as he reached for her. He could barely believe it. They had done it. The forest's curse had been broken. The heart was destroyed, and they had survived. But the cost had been high. The cabin, no longer held together by the forest's power, was beginning to crumble. The beams above them groaned under the weight of the destruction, and the ground beneath them was already cracking. The cabin was no longer a safe place. It was just another part of the forest's decaying grip. "We have to go," Jonas whispered to Ava, his voice hoarse. "We have to leave. Now." But as they stood, the air grew thick once more. The ground beneath them split open again, and in the distance, they could hear the rumble of something terrible, something awakening. The forest was dying, yes, but it was not finished yet. The true cost of breaking its heart was now becoming clear. The cabin crumbled behind them as Jonas helped Ava to her feet. The forest's final roar echoed through the land, as if calling them back. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air shimmered with a pulse of dark energy. The forest was collapsing, but would they make it out alive? Or would it reclaim them all in one final, vengeful surge? The moment Jonas and Ava stumbled away from the crumbling remnants of the cabin, the ground beneath them seemed to shift once more, as if the forest itself was resisting their escape. The air was thick with the scent of decay and earth, and the silence that had once felt like a relief now pressed down on them with an unbearable weight. The forest was dying, yes, but it wasn't going to let them leave without a price. Jonas glanced back at the cabin, his breath shallow, his body aching from the exertion of the past hours. The destruction was undeniable. The house, once so alive, with the forest's power, was now a hollow shell, crumbling under the weight of the curse that had been broken. But in its wake, something else was stirring. Ava, still weak but recovering, clung to Jonas's side, her hand shaking. She was no longer transforming, no longer a prisoner of the forest's will, but she still looked pale. Her body ached, as though she had been pulled through 1,000 horrors. "Jonas, we did it, right? It's over?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jonas turned to face her, his face grim. I don't know. We destroyed the heart, but there's something else. Something worse. The forest isn't finished with us yet." The ground rumbled again, this time more violently, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. It wasn't just the earth shaking. It felt like the very soul of the forest was screaming in anguish, and in its final throes, it was reaching for them, hungry. Suddenly, the air was filled with the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, the unmistakable sound of something or someone approaching them. Jonas's heart skipped a beat as the figure materialized from the mist. It wasn't just one figure, it was a procession. A parade of ghostly, translucent forms, their faces twisted in agony. They moved in perfect unison, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. The spirits of the forest, the ones who had once been human, were now lost, forever bound to the land by the forest's curse. They had no names anymore, no lives. They were nothing but echoes, trapped in a cycle of torment and rage. Ava's eyes widened. In horror, she recognized them. They're the lost ones. The people who never escaped, she whispered, her voice trembling with recognition and fear. The ones who vanished in the woods. Jonas's heart pounded as the spirits surrounded them. Their hollow eyes were locked onto him and Ava, their movements slow but deliberate, their mouths open in silent screams. "We were once like you," one of the spirits said, its voice a distorted echo of its former self. "We sought freedom, we sought peace, but we are bound, and now you will join us." Ava recoiled, pulling away from the spirit that reached toward her. "No, we didn't deserve this." But the spirit didn't respond. It only reached closer, its outstretched fingers brushing against the air between them, like it was trying to touch the very essence of their souls. The ground beneath them cracked again, and Jonas stumbled as the earth shifted. More vines erupted from the soil, curling around their legs, trying to drag them back toward the forest. The spirits didn't speak anymore. They didn't need to. The forest was using them, using their suffering, to drag Jonas and Ava back into the abyss. Jonas's mind raced, He had thought they were free when they destroyed the heart, but he now realized that the forest wasn't just a land. It was a sentient being, and the rituals of the lost souls were tied directly to the power of the earth. They could break the heart, but they couldn't break the curse completely without facing the vengeful spirits that had been feeding it. He turned to Ava, his eyes desperate. "We need to finish this. We need to sever the connection. If we don't stop it now, we'll never get out. We'll never be free." Ava nodded, her face pale but determined. She knew what they had to do. They had to sever the ritual, the bond between the lost souls and the land. But how? The answer came in a rush. The forest had already shown its weakness. It had tried to destroy them by pulling them into the earth, but it couldn't fully control them. The curse was strong, yes, but it had limits. The spirits might be trapped in an endless cycle, but they weren't invincible. Jonas's eyes landed on a strange symbol on the ground, half covered by roots and dirt. He recognized it instantly, the same symbol he had seen carved into the walls of the cabin. It was an ancient sigil, a mark of binding, used to seal the forest's power and keep the spirits from escaping. But now it was their weapon. "Ava," Jonas shouted, "we need to destroy it. We need to break the seal completely." Ava didn't hesitate. With a strength she hadn't felt in hours, she shoved aside the roots that covered the symbol, revealing it in full. The sigil pulsed faintly, like the last heartbeat of a dying creature. As she knelt beside it, Jonas grabbed a jagged stone from the ground and slammed it down onto the symbol, breaking it. The instant the stone touched the sigil, the world around them shuddered. The spirits screamed in agony, their forms twisting and distorting as the seal broke, their chains to the forest weakening. The air around them grew thick with the force of their power, as if the forest itself was fighting back. "Now!" Jonas shouted, pulling Ava back as the ground beneath them cracked open wide. The vines recoiled, pulling back into the earth as the spirits surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and fear. The pulse of the earth faded. Ava, her face pale and her body weak, grabbed Jonas's hand. The air was still heavy with the remnants of the forest's power, but the ground was no longer trembling. The spirits were fading, their forms vanishing. "Into the mist! We did it!" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible. But there was no time to celebrate. The earth was still quaking, the final signs of the forest's struggle against its inevitable end. Jonas glanced around them, his eyes wide. "We need to leave. Now." The earth was cracking around them, the last remnants of the forest's curse, crumbling as the spirits dissolved into the air. The forest wasn't fully destroyed yet, but the seal had been broken. It was weakened, and now they could escape. But would they make it out in time? As Jonas and Ava sprinted toward the tree line, the last of the forest's power surged behind them, trying to pull them back into its depths. The air crackled with the dying breath of the forest, the earth beneath their feet quaking, threatening to swallow them whole. Would they escape, or would the forest claim them one last time, dragging them into its ancient heart before the land could fully collapse? Jonas and Ava ran, their legs aching with exhaustion, their breaths ragged and shallow. The ground beneath them continued to crack, the earth itself shifting as the dying forest fought against their escape. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning wood and the heavy scent of decay. Behind them, the forest raged in its final moments, its power collapsing in on itself, but not before unleashing one last desperate surge of fury. The spirits, now free from their chains, but still bound to the forest, surged toward them like a tidal wave, their faces twisted in agony, their voices mingling in a chorus of torment. The forest was fighting back, thrashing in its death throes, determined not to let its prisoners go. "We have to hurry!" Jonas shouted, his voice barely reaching Ava over the cacophony of wailing spirits and the rumbling ground. "If we don't reach the edge of the forest, we'll never make it out." Ava stumbled beside him, her body weak, but her determination kept her moving. I can't keep going," she gasped, the exhaustion of the night catching up with her. "Jonas, I can't." Jonas gritted his teeth, pulling her forward, his grip tight around her wrist. "You have to. We're almost there. We can't stop now." They pushed through the dense underbrush, their path becoming more treacherous with every step. The forest was no longer a place of natural beauty. It was a twisted, nightmarish version of itself. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching toward them like skeletal hands. The air was thick with the oppressive weight of the forest's death, the last vestiges of its life force fighting to claim them both. The ground beneath their feet buckled again, sending them both tumbling forward. Ava let out a strangled cry as the earth shifted beneath her, but Jonas caught her just in time, pulling her upright again. But as he did, he felt a wave of dizziness crash over him, his vision blurring. "Jonas!" Ava shouted, panic rising in her voice. "Jonas, stay with me!" "I'm fine," Jonas said, his voice strained. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. The pull of the forest's energy was weakening him, draining his strength with each passing moment. He could feel it. The forest's ancient power was still alive, pulsing beneath the ground, trying to reclaim them. They stumbled forward, the trees thinning as they neared the edge of the forest. Just when Jonas thought they might escape, the ground shook violently again. A deep, rumbling growl sounded from behind them, and they both turned to face the source of the noise. From the heart of the forest, something huge was rising. A dark mass of roots and twisted limbs, a grotesque form that was part tree, part beast. The last of the forest's vengeful spirit, its heart, had not been destroyed. It had merely shattered, releasing the beast that had been waiting beneath the surface. The creature was monstrous, its form writhing with dark energy, its eyes, glowing with malevolent intent, fixed on them, and its roar shook the very earth beneath their feet. "No!" Ava cried, her voice breaking. "It's not dead, it's still alive." Jonas's pulse quickened as he realized the true horror of what they had unleashed. The forest's heart had been destroyed, yes, but its ancient curse had not died with it. The creature that was now stalking them was the physical manifestation of that curse, a twisted remnant of the forest's power. "We can't outrun it," Jonas said, his voice desperate. "We need to stop it, now!" But the creature was already closing in, its massive, twisted limbs reaching toward them with horrifying speed. It had no face, just a mass of dark, gnarled roots and bark, twisting into unnatural shapes. Its roar was deafening, filling the air with an unearthly howl that sent chills down their spines. "Jonas, what do we do?" Ava's voice was shaky, but she was still standing, still fighting. "What can
we do? It's too strong."
Jonas looked around, his eyes darting frantically. There was no time to think, no time to plan. The creature was too close. But then he remembered something. The sigil, the symbol they had uncovered earlier. The ritual was still incomplete. The forest had been trapped by that symbol, its energy bound by the ritual that had once held it at bay. If the creature was the embodiment of that curse, then it too could be bound. "We have to destroy the source," Jonas shouted. "The ritual. We have to finish what we started." Ava's eyes widened in understanding. "The symbol," she whispered. "But how?" "The forest is everywhere, Jonas. It's too late. The creature reached them just then, its root-like limbs lashing out. Ava screamed as one of the branches shot toward her, but Jonas shoved her aside, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground. He didn't know if this would work, but it was their only chance. With everything he had, Jonas hurled the rock toward the ground at the base of the creature, where the sigil should have been. The moment the rock hit the earth, a deafening crack rang out and the ground beneath them split open. The creature howled, its body writhing as the sigil glowed brightly in the ground, but it wasn't just the sigil. A pulse of dark energy surged from it, shooting through the forest and into the heart of the creature. The earth beneath them groaned as the very roots of the forest were torn asunder. The creature howled one final time, a screech of pure anguish, before it was consumed by the light. And then, silence. Jonas and Ava were thrown to the ground as the creature disintegrated into ash. The forest fell quiet, but in that moment of stillness they both felt it. Something else was rising, something even older, even darker. The heart of the forest was dead, yes, but the land, the curse, had not been fully broken. The earth itself trembled with a final dying breath, and a new terror began to unfurl beneath their feet. Was the forest truly dead, or had they merely stirred something far worse? The silence after the creature's destruction was suffocating. The massive roar that had filled the air moments before was gone, leaving only the distant murmur of the collapsing forest. The earth no longer trembled beneath their feet, and the oppressive energy that had weighed down on Jonas and Ava seemed to lift, almost as if the forest had breathed its last. Jonas staggered to his feet, breathing heavily, his body battered from the struggle. His limbs ached, and his mind felt fogged by the darkness they had just faced. But they had done it. They had destroyed the heart, severed the ritual, and stopped the monstrous force that had controlled the forest. Ava was still on her knees, looking up at him, her eyes wide and filled with disbelief. We did it. It's over, right? Her voice was shaky, as if she still couldn't quite believe it herself. But Jonas wasn't so sure. He stared at the remnants of the creature, its dark ashes scattered across the earth, and then turned his gaze toward the forest. The trees, once so dark and twisted, now stood eerily still, their branches hanging low, but the stillness felt unnatural. The land had changed, yes, but something about it still felt wrong. Jonas's heart began to pound once more, his mind racing. There was something they hadn't considered, something that hadn't yet been addressed. Ava, he whispered, his voice tight with worry. It's not over. Not yet. Ava looked up at him, her expression faltering. What do you mean? The creature's gone. The curse. It's broken, right? Jonas shook his head slowly. I thought it was. I wanted it to be, but something still. Here, something deeper. He glanced at the land around them, the fading mist still clinging to the earth. We've destroyed the heart, but the forest, the curse, it's been here for far longer than we realize. It's not just alive. It's been feeding off generations of souls. The air grew cold once more, and a low, ominous hum began to resonate from the earth. Jonas felt it deep in his chest, like the last breath of the land, an ancient pulse that still echoed beneath the surface. Ava's eyes widened in realization. You think it's still feeding on us? On our souls? Jonas nodded. The forest doesn't just trap souls. It keeps them, feeds on their fear, their grief, their regret. When we destroyed the heart, we broke the ritual. It shattered the surface. But the forest's power, it's tied to the land itself. The souls it's consumed are still here, beneath the soil. And unless we do something more, they'll keep feeding the curse. Ava's expression hardened. So, we have to finish it. For good. For everyone it's taken. Jonas clenched his fists, his mind whirling. They had already faced so much, but the final piece of the puzzle was eluding him. The forest, no, the land, was still alive. Still hunting. But why? And how could they stop it? The ground shifted again, this time more violently. The rumble echoed through the trees, and the distant sky grew darker, as though a storm was brewing. In that moment, Jonas remembered the old stories he had read about the forest's curse, about an ancient ritual that not only bound the souls, to the land, but sustained the forest's life force. The heart had been the source, yes, but it wasn't the only piece. The true key to ending the curse lay deeper, beneath the earth, where the forest's power was drawn from the spirits it had claimed. The ritual wasn't just a sacrifice, it was ongoing, tied to the very land itself. And unless the final act of the ritual was completed, the forest would continue to live, eternally feeding on the souls of the lost. Jonas's heart sank as he understood what needed to be done. We have to go deeper. Ava's eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? Jonas looked around, his gaze fixed on the broken ground beneath their feet. The land was shifting once more, as though it was calling them, urging them to go deeper. He realized then that the key to breaking the curse once and for all was not just destroying the heart. It was destroying the source, the very land that had given birth to the forest's unholy power. They needed to descend into the heart of the land itself, into the burial grounds, into the very earth where the forest had first drawn its strength. Jonas felt a cold chill creep down his spine. The final sacrifice, he muttered, the words hanging in the air between them. To sever the connection, to destroy the forest's power completely. We have to give ourselves to the land. Ava stepped back, her face pale. You don't mean... Jonas nodded grimly. I do. One final sacrifice is needed. One willing soul to bind the curse to the earth, to sever the connection between the forest and the spirits forever. Ava's eyes filled with horror as the full implication of Jonas's words sank in. You can't, Jonas, you can't do that. He turned to face her, his expression softening for a moment. I can, and I will. It's the only way. I must be the final sacrifice to free the others, to break the curse completely. Ava took a step toward him, her hands shaking. No, there has to be another way. You've already done so much. I won't let you. But Jonas could already feel the pull. The forest was still alive, still waiting, and he knew what he had to do. The curse could not be broken unless the forest had a final, willing soul to seal it away forever. With one final, pained look at Ava, Jonas took a deep breath. This is the only way to stop it. Ava stood frozen, the weight of his decision crashing over her like a wave. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, but in that moment, she understood. Jonas was willing to give everything to save them, everything. Jonas knelt beside Ava, his face set in determination. This is the only way to save us, to save the world from the forest's curse. If I don't, it will never end. The ground around them began to tremble once more as the forest's final, terrible pulse surged beneath their feet. Would Jonas truly sacrifice himself to save them? Or would the forest consume them both, pulling them into its endless, unforgiving cycle of torment? The ground beneath them groaned, its deep, resonant hum filling the air as Jonas and Ava stood at the precipice of the forest's final collapse. The trees around them, their once dark and twisted forms now fading into shadows, seemed to tremble, as if they were alive, as if they too could feel the final moments of their existence. The forest, its heart shattered and its power waning, was not going down quietly. Its last breath was loud, filled with anguish, and it was demanding one last sacrifice. Jonas stood still, every muscle in his body taut with the gravity of his decision. He could feel the weight of the curse pressing on him, could feel the pull of the land, the pull of the ritual that was now inescapable. The spirits of the lost souls had vanished, but the forest's essence, its malevolent power, still lingered like a dark cloud in the air, waiting for him to fulfill his role in the ancient cycle. Ava, standing just a few feet away, looked at him, her eyes filled with desperation and sorrow. You don't have to do this, she whispered. her voice a fragile thread of emotion. "We've come so far. Please, there has to be another way." Jonas turned toward her, his expression softening for a moment, but the resolve in his eyes remained unwavering. "Ava, this is the only way." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying sorrow that he couldn't hide. "The curse, it has to end. If I don't finish this, the forest will never stop. It will keep feeding. It will keep killing." Ava's heart clenched in her chest as she stepped forward, reaching out to him, her voice trembling with the weight of her fear. "Please, there has to be another way. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. You've already done so much. Please, please don't leave me." Jonas reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle, his touch reassuring despite the terror that gnawed at his insides. "I don't have a choice, Ava. We all have a purpose, and this is mine. The forest. It's been feeding off souls for centuries. It won't stop unless I finish this. It's the only way for us to truly be free." Ava's breath hitched, but she nodded, her tears now mixing with the rain that had begun to fall softly around them. She knew he was right. The forest, no matter how much they had already destroyed, would never let them go without a price, and Jonas had already given so much. "Then, let me be with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." Ava's voice was firm now, a spark of resolve lighting up her features despite the dread that still clung to her heart. Jonas gave her a long, final look, his eyes filled with love and sorrow. "I love you," he whispered, "and I'll always be with you. You have to keep fighting. You can't let the forest win." Ava nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. But she could feel him slipping away, not just from her, but from this world. His sacrifice was inevitable, and there was no going back. Not now. The ground beneath them trembled again, this time with an intensity that sent a shockwave through the very air around them. Jonas felt it. The forest was ready. He could see the fissures in the earth, the cracks spreading like veins across the land, as though the forest itself was opening up to consume him. The ritual, the final piece, was nearly complete. With a deep breath, Jonas turned toward the heart of the forest, where the ground had split open, revealing the ancient burial grounds beneath the land. He knew what had to be done. The final sacrifice was not just a physical one. It was a metaphysical binding, a way to sever the forest's hold on the souls trapped within. Ava followed him, each step heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. She couldn't stop him, but she would stay with him until the end. Jonas knelt at the center of the broken earth, feeling the pulse of the land reverberate through his bones. The ritual was ancient, and it called for a blood sacrifice, a willing soul to bind the curse, to destroy the heart of the forest and sever the last remnants of its power. Jonas reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, rusted knife, the bita, blade reflecting the dim light of the dying forest. He could feel the energy swirling around him, the power of the curse calling to him, urging him to surrender. But he knew this was the only way to break the cycle. He held the knife high, his heart steady despite the chaos swirling around him. "I offer myself to the land," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I give myself to end the curse." The moment the blade touched his skin, a flash of blinding light erupted from the earth beneath him. The land seemed to cry out in pain, and the forest's power surged with an intensity that threatened to tear him apart. The trees around them began to twist and writhe, their branches reaching toward the sky as the ritual took hold. Ava screamed his name, but Jonas couldn't hear her. The energy was consuming him now, pulling him deeper into the earth as the curse began to unravel. His vision blurred, and he could feel his very essence being drawn into the land, his life force becoming one with the forest, just as it had for so many others before him. The earth beneath them cracked open wider, and for a moment, Jonas saw it. The true face of the forest. It was not a monster, not a beast. It was death itself, a force older than time, feeding off the souls of the lost, trapping them in a cycle of torment. But now, with his sacrifice, that cycle was ending. The light grew brighter, and Jonas felt the pull of the land weakening. The curse, the spirits, the forest's power. They were all fading, unraveling, returning to the earth where they had come from. And then, as quickly as it had all begun, it was over. Ava stood alone in the stillness, the rain falling gently around her as the forest fell silent. Jonas was gone, but the land around her was changing. The dark trees, the oppressive mist, the pulsing earth, all were gone, replaced by a quiet, serene calm. The curse had been broken, but was it really over? Or had the forest merely changed form, leaving behind something darker, more insidious waiting in the shadows? You're deep into the story now, and the horrors are only escalating. If you're still with us, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. Who else is staying up late to face this nightmare? Settle in. The terror continues. Story 2. The storm had been gathering since their arrival. Emma, Caleb, Hannah, Jack and Mia, excited for a weekend retreat, were driving up through the narrow mountain roads toward a mansion that stood like a forgotten sentinel, abandoned for decades. The road wound through dense forests, the trees seeming to crowd in on them as if the forest itself was reluctant to let them pass. As the group pulled up to the mansion's gates, the massive iron-wrought archway creaked open, its hinges long rusted. The house loomed ahead, towering and silent, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring out over the jagged cliffs below. The air was thick with the scent of rain and old wood, and the mansion seemed to breathe, like it had been waiting for their arrival. The faint rustling of the trees around them created a dissonant symphony, adding to the unnerving atmosphere. This place is a bit more isolated than I expected, Hannah remarked, her voice edged with uncertainty. She was the most sensitive of the group, and even though she didn't want to show it, she could feel an unsettling presence, something intangible but present nonetheless. Jack, ever the adventurer, chuckled. It's perfect for us, a mansion in the middle of nowhere, away from the noise of the world. He didn't share Hannah's trepidation, though his eyes constantly flickered to the dark forest that stretched endlessly beyond the house. Mia, the one who kept the group grounded, rolled her eyes at Jack's enthusiasm. Right, just don't. Expect me to go exploring those woods in the middle of the night. Emma, the practical one, leaned against the car and looked up at the mansion. It's beautiful, she said, a little worn down, but it has character. The mansion stood on a hill that overlooked a deep valley, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to form a natural barrier between the outside world and the house. A layer of fog was beginning to creep over the forest, curling up around the trees like the tendrils of something alive. Emma had always enjoyed finding the charm in things, and even though the house had a certain ghostly aura about it, she couldn't deny that it had a beauty that made it stand out. Looks like a place where mystery novels are set, Caleb said, tugging his suitcase from the trunk. He was the most skeptical of the group, always looking for a logical explanation for things, no matter how strange. His skepticism was part of the reason the group had decided to come together for this trip. He was the one who would debunk any spooky occurrences. But as they stood at the gates, even he couldn't shake the eerie feeling in the air. The caretaker had been a wiry, grizzled old man who warned them about the mansion in an oddly cryptic manner. It's all right to stay, just don't go near the forest after dark. And whatever you do, don't go looking for what's buried there. The woods don't like trespassers. His words were spoken in a thick accent, and his eyes darted nervously around them as if the trees themselves were listening. "Don't go near the forest after dark," Emma had repeated, jokingly mimicking the caretaker's voice, a small laugh escaping her. But her attempt to lighten the mood only made Hannah feel more unsettled. They all grabbed their bags and headed inside, the heavy wooden doors creaking open with a loud groan as if protesting their entry. The mansion's interior was dusty, its grandeur long faded. The once grand chandeliers were now covered in cobwebs, and the faded wallpaper hung in tatters like the memories of a forgotten time. Yet there was still an odd beauty to it. The tall windows let in slivers of fading daylight, and the faint smell of old wood and earth added to the house's timeless aura. Mia set her bag down and surveyed the room. "Let's get this place cleaned up. I'm sure it'll look better once we get the lights on." As the group began to settle in, the storm outside grew more intense. The sound of rain hammering against the windows intensified, and the wind howled, as though it was trapped in the mansion's many rooms. The atmosphere inside grew thick with tension, and though they were all eager to catch up after being apart for so long, the weight of the mansion's presence made it difficult to focus on anything but the strange feeling it gave off. "Let's explore a bit," Jack suggested. "I'm dying to see the rest of this place." "Maybe after we get the fire going," Caleb replied, clearly more cautious than Jack. But Jack was already on his way up the stairs, his heavy boots echoing in the silence of the old house. The others reluctantly followed, each step creaking as they explored the forgotten halls of the mansion. Upstairs, the air grew colder, the temperature noticeably dropping as the storm continued to rage outside. They passed rooms with broken windows, some of the walls crumbling, the faint smell of mildew hanging in the air. "This place is amazing," Jack said, standing in front of a large painting that hung crookedly on the wall. The painting depicted an old family, their faces almost too lifelike, their eyes unsettlingly vivid. "I wonder who these people were." "I'm not sure I want to know," Hannah murmured, casting a nervous glance at the darkened corners of the house. She wasn't one to scare easily, but the unsettling feeling was growing stronger. Suddenly the lights flickered, and the house seemed to groan under the weight of the storm outside. A distant, soft sound like whispers could be heard, but the group shrugged it off as the wind. They all gathered around the large fireplace, attempting to light a fire and make the space feel warmer. But the fire didn't seem to catch, the logs stubbornly refusing to burn, as though the house itself didn't want them to be comfortable. Mia looked out the window, her eyes narrowing as she watched the forest. The shadows there seemed deeper than normal, and she could have sworn she saw something move in the distance. The trees looked almost alive, their branches twisting unnaturally in the wind. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling. "You okay?" Emma asked, noticing her unease. "Yeah, just a little tired. I think I'll head to bed early tonight," Mia replied with a forced smile. As they continued settling in, the rain began to fall harder, the winds picking up speed. It wasn't long before the group gathered in the main living room, trying to make the best of it. But despite their efforts to ignore the growing unease, there was an air of discomfort settling between them all. Mia noticed that the mansion itself seemed to be humming, faint at first, like a low vibration beneath the floor. It grew louder as the night went on, and soon it was all they could hear. She couldn't tell if it was just the storm or something else. The lights flickered once more, and then the storm outside seemed to pause just for a second. The house groaned again, like it was settling deeper into the earth. Everyone went quiet. Suddenly the temperature dropped further, the chill in the air becoming impossible to ignore. A shadow shifted across the wall, just a flash, as if something had moved. "Did you guys see that?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They all froze, looking toward the door. The shadow was gone. "I'm sure it's just the wind," Jack said dismissively, trying to lighten the mood. But his voice didn't carry the same confidence it once had. As they settled down, the storm raged on, and the first night in the mansion began. But no one could shake the feeling that the house was not empty, and that the forest, just beyond the mansion's walls, was watching them. The first night at the mansion was supposed to be about relaxation, but the longer they spent in the house, the more they began to sense something was wrong. The rain pounded relentlessly against the windows, like 1,000 hands drumming in. Frustration and the wind howled like some ancient forgotten thing. Despite their attempts to ignore the unease creeping into their minds, the atmosphere inside felt suffocating. The house seemed to groan and shift as though it were alive, aware of their presence. As the evening deepened, the group sat around the large, old-fashioned fireplace in the living room, attempting to distract themselves with stories, music, and the crackling fire. But no matter how much they laughed or how many times they tried to change the subject, an unspoken tension lingered between them. Emma glanced around at her friends, trying to gauge their discomfort. Jack and Caleb were still tossing around jokes, trying to lighten the mood. But Hannah and Mia were more withdrawn. Hannah seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes occasionally darting to the dark corners of the room, and Mia couldn't help but constantly glance out the window where the storm had begun to intensify. "Are you sure this place is safe?" Mia asked, her voice barely rising above the storm's roar. She turned away from the window, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root deep in her chest. "I keep feeling like something is watching us." "Don't be silly," Jack said with a dismissive laugh, though his tone didn't carry the usual lightheartedness. "We're just in the middle of nowhere. It's a big house, a little creaky, and a storm outside. That's all." Caleb, looking far more skeptical than usual, added, "It's just a house. The wind's making things sound creepy. You're all freaking yourselves out." But Mia wasn't so sure. She had always been sensitive to places with a dark history, and there was something about this mansion that felt wrong. The shadows seemed deeper here, the air thicker. It wasn't just the storm or the forest outside, it was the house itself, its quiet weight pressing down on them. She could feel it in her bones. Hannah was the first to notice it. She had been staring at the fire, lost in thought, when the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. It wasn't the usual coldness of an old house. It was an unnatural chill that seemed to wrap itself around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. A cold that didn't belong. "Did you feel that?" Hannah asked, her voice shaking slightly as she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The others immediately fell silent, looking at her with confused expressions. The fire crackled louder as the room grew colder. It was as if something had passed through the room, something unseen and tangible. I don't know. I thought I heard something," Hannah muttered, feeling foolish. "Probably just my imagination, right?" Mia, who had been staring at the window, turned back toward the group. "I thought I saw something out there. The trees, they were moving differently." She stopped, biting her lip. "I know it sounds stupid, but it's like they were alive, or aware of us." There was a collective pause. The wind howled outside, again louder than before, almost deafening, and for a moment it felt like the house itself exhaled. A long, tired sigh. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, filled with unspoken dread. Caleb, trying to break the tension, stood up and stretched. "Look, we're here to have fun, okay? Let's not get too caught up in this. It's just an old house and the storm's messing with our heads." Jack grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Right. A storm, a little dark history, and some weird forest vibes. Nothing to freak out over." But even Jack couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that was settling over them like an oppressive weight. Something wasn't right. The group tried to shake off the feeling. They continued their evening, though the conversations were quieter, the laughter more forced. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to intensify. The wind howled louder, the rain began to batter the windows, and the once subtle creaking of the house grew more pronounced, as though the walls themselves were groaning under the weight of something ancient. Mia was the first to retreat to her room. She could no longer ignore the anxiety that gripped her chest. The house felt suffocating. She needed to lie down, clear her head. It wasn't until she was halfway up the stairs that she noticed something strange. A faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible, coming from the direction of the dark hallway. She froze, holding her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her ears, but the whisper was gone. She shook her head, trying to convince herself it was just the storm, the house settling. In her room, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, the darkness heavier. As she lay in bed, trying to calm herself, she kept hearing faint sounds, soft taps, a rustle of fabric. Her skin prickled as the noise seemed to come from the corner of the room. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the house settling. Something, someone, was moving around her room. But when she turned on the light, the room was empty, just the shadows stretching out over the floor. Meanwhile, Caleb and Jack were still downstairs, sitting by the fire. Caleb glanced over at Jack, who was oddly quiet now. They hadn't spoken in several minutes. "What's up, man?" Caleb asked, eyeing Jack. "You're acting strange." Jack looked over, his eyes slightly wide. "I don't know, dude. I keep hearing these whispers, like people talking, but no one's there." Caleb froze, his gaze darting toward the dark hallway. He felt a cold chill down his spine. "You're hearing that too?" Jack nodded, his face pale. "I thought it was just me, but it's too real. It's like someone's walking around up there." The hairs on the back of Caleb's neck stood on end. "Maybe it's just the wind, right? The house is old, and the storm's messing with the air pressure." But neither of them was convinced. The sense of something watching them, waiting for something, was too intense. The tension in the room grew thick, like they were being hunted by an unseen force. The night wore on, and the strange occurrences began to escalate. Doors creaked open on their own. Faint whispers echoed through the halls, and the cold draft intensified. The fire flickered ominously, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. And then, at precisely midnight, the temperature in the room dropped to an impossible chill, as if the house had frozen over. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, echoing down from the upper floors, calling their names. Hannah, who had been restless in her room, rushed out into the hallway, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Someone's in the house." The others joined her, their eyes wide with fear as the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, darker. As they huddled together, the whispers grew clearer, faint but distinct. "Leave." A loud bang from upstairs broke the silence. The floor above them creaked under weight, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Jack stepped forward. "That's it. I'm going up there." "No, Jack, don't." Mia's voice cracked, her hand grabbing his arm. "We need to stay together. This house, something's wrong." But Jack shrugged her off. "We need answers, Mia. I'm not just going to sit here and wait for whatever's haunting us to show up." With that, Jack made his way toward the stairs. The rest of the group hesitated, their fear mounting, but none of them were brave enough to stop him. The group followed Jack up the stairs, where the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and the coldness in the air thickened. When they reached the top of the stairs, they turned down the dark hallway, where the whispers seemed to be coming from. As they approached the first door, a sound stopped them. A low groan, like the house itself was waking up. The door creaked open on its own, and then they saw it. In the dark room beyond, the walls seemed to pulse, the shadows moving unnaturally, and in the center of it, a figure stood, a silhouette, too tall, too thin and standing still, watching them with eyes that glowed faintly red. Jack took a step forward. "Who are you?" But the figure didn't respond. Instead, the shadows closed in, and the whispers grew louder. "Leave. Leave now." And just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, casting long shadows over the floor of the mansion. The storm outside had subsided, but the sense of unease lingered like a thick fog, settling over the group. Mia awoke first, her mind still reeling from the events of the night before. The whispers, the shadows, and the unsettling figure that had appeared in the room, they were still fresh in her mind. She tried to shake it off, telling herself that it was just a bad dream. But as she walked into the hallway, she immediately noticed something that sent a chill through her spine. Jack's door was wide open. Mia approached cautiously, her hand hovering over the doorframe. It was silent inside, save for the soft sound of the house creaking, as if it were breathing. She peered inside. Jack's bed was empty. A wave of dread washed over her. She stepped inside, scanning the room. His things were still here. His backpack, his shoes, the jacket he'd thrown over the chair the night before. But he was gone. "Jack," Mia called softly, but there was no response. She rushed back to the main room where the others were gathering, her heart racing. "Where's Jack?" Mia asked, voice trembling. Caleb, who had been sitting at the table sipping coffee, looked up, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, where's Jack? He's probably still sleeping off whatever that was last night." "No," Mia insisted. "He's not in his room. I checked. His stuff is there, but he's gone." Hannah, who had been standing near the window, her eyes fixed on the now calm forest outside, turned slowly toward Mia. "Maybe he went out. He didn't seem too scared last night. He probably just went for a walk or something." "But why? Didn't he say anything?" Mia asked, frustration building in her voice. "If he went outside, he would have told someone, and why would he leave his stuff behind?" Emma, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "Mia's right. This isn't like him. Something's wrong." The group exchanged uneasy glances. The tension from the previous night had followed them into the day. No one had really slept well. The noises, the cold, the shadows, it had all been too real. Hannah's voice was shaky. Maybe he left, like you said. Or maybe he's messing with us. Trying to prank us." "Prank us?" Caleb snapped, his usual skepticism dissolving into worry. "In the middle of the night, after everything that happened." Mia was already at the front door, her hand on the handle. "We need to search the property. He couldn't have just disappeared without a trace. We need to know what happened." The group moved outside, their boots crunching against the damp ground. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy with dark clouds, a pale sun casting a weak light over the forest that stretched endlessly in every direction. The mansion sat like a dark monolith in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the thick woods that seemed to press in from all sides. As they made their way through the overgrown yard, the silence of the woods was almost oppressive. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made them jump. It felt like the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting. Jack wasn't anywhere to be found. The group split up, each taking a different path through the trees. They called out for Jack, but only the wind responded, carrying their voices away into the thick woods. Mia felt a wave of panic rising in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she peered into the shifting shadows of the trees. Something was wrong with the forest. It felt too quiet, too still. "Jack, where are you?" she shouted, her voice rising. "Come on, this isn't funny." There was no answer, only the wind. As they regrouped near the edge of the forest, their faces pale with growing concern, Hannah's voice broke the silence. I think we should go back inside. This is too much. Yeah, we should call for help, Emma suggested. We'll head back to the house, use the phone. We can't keep searching like this. But Mia wasn't ready to give up. We're not going inside yet. I feel like we're missing something. That was when Caleb noticed something odd. A faint set of footprints leading deeper into the forest. The prints were small, barely visible, in the wet soil, but they were unmistakable. It looked like someone had walked through the mud, their steps light but deliberate. Look, Caleb said, pointing them out. These don't look like animal tracks. They're too clean. These are...
Jack's footprints. Mia stepped forward, eyes scanning the ground. I'm not so sure.
But Hannah, who had followed behind them, gasped. Wait, look, there's more. There's blood. The ground was marked with small, dark stains, leading toward a dense thicket of trees. Jack's hurt, Mia whispered, her heart pounding. She wanted to rush forward, but the presence of the blood was enough to stop her. This was no longer a simple search for their missing friend. Something had happened. The group hesitated, but the trail led them on. They followed the footprints and bloodstains, the forest growing darker around them as the trees closed in. The air felt thicker now, pressing against their chests with each step. Mia could feel her anxiety escalating as they ventured further. The whispers from the house seemed to follow them, faint but insistent, like voices beckoning them towards something terrible. At last they reached a clearing deep in the woods. The air was thick with moisture and a sense of impending dread. And there, standing in the center of the clearing, was Jack. But he wasn't moving. Mia's heart dropped into her stomach. She called his name. Jack, are you okay? But Jack didn't respond. His body was turned away from them, standing rigidly still, his back to the group. He looked almost like a statue, his arms hanging limply at his sides. As they approached cautiously, the stillness of the scene became even more unsettling. Jack's head was tilted unnaturally to one side, and his eyes, when they finally looked at him, were wide and glassy. They were staring ahead, unblinking, his mouth hanging open in a strange, twisted grin. His skin was pale, almost grayish, and there was something off about the way he stood, like he was no longer entirely human. Mia took a trembling step forward. Jack? Suddenly his head jerked toward them, his eyes snapping into focus. But there was no recognition in them, only an eerie, cold emptiness. And then, in a voice that didn't sound like Jack at all, he spoke. Leave. The forest surrounding the mansion had always seemed dark and imposing, but now it felt like a labyrinth, stretching out infinitely, its trees whispering secrets to one another. After Jack's chilling words, leave, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The air had grown thicker, colder, and every step taken felt heavier, as if the very earth was pulling them down into some forgotten abyss. Mia, still reeling from the sight of Jack's unsettling transformation, took a few shaky steps backward. We need to go. We need to get out of here. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears as the rest of the group stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Jack, or what had once been Jack, stood motionless in the center of the clearing, his eyes still, vacant, his lips stretched into that grotesque grin. His presence was paralyzing, like a specter that had crawled from the depths of the forest, manifesting through the living. Jack, you need to snap out of it, Caleb shouted, his voice raw with panic. But there was no answer, no movement. Jack's eyes remained fixed on something beyond them, something only he could see. Mia could feel her stomach tightening with fear. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was alive, watching them, listening. It was as if the trees were closing in on them, their branches twisting and stretching toward the clearing. She could feel the pull. Something ancient, something powerful was drawing them deeper into the woods. We have to leave now, Hannah urged, her voice trembling. This place, it's not just haunted. Something is here, something wants us. But they couldn't leave Jack behind. Not like this. His transformation or possession, or whatever it was, had to be addressed. The group moved forward cautiously, but every step taken felt like they were walking in quicksand, each footfall heavier than the last. Emma, the ever-pragmatic one, hesitated before speaking. Maybe he's just lost. Maybe the forest did something to him. We can still help him. Help him? Mia asked, her voice tight. He's not Jack anymore. He's something else. Mia's words seemed to strike a chord in Caleb. He stepped forward, determined to reach Jack. But as soon as he did, the wind began to pick up, rustling through the trees in an unsettling manner. The forest groaned like it was alive and angry. Suddenly the ground beneath them trembled. A low, unnatural hum seemed to resonate from deep within the woods, vibrating through the soles of their feet and rattling their bones. "Stay close!" Caleb shouted as he backed away from Jack, who still hadn't moved. Just then, the faintest sound echoed from the trees, like a whisper, too soft to catch but not entirely silent. "They are coming." Mia's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at the others, their faces stricken with fear. The sense of being hunted, being drawn in, grew stronger with each passing second. The forest seemed to pulse, as if it had a heart, and that heart was beating faster, calling to them. "We need to find the source," Hannah said. "We need to get to the mansion. There has to be something inside, something that can explain all of this." She turned back toward the mansion, but the look in her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "We can't leave Jack here like this, but we also can't stay. The house has the answers. It has to." Mia didn't disagree. "But how do we help Jack if he's—" She trailed off, the words feeling hollow. Whatever Jack had become, it was no longer their friend. The mansion held the key to everything, and they needed to face whatever it was hiding. But as they started to head back toward the mansion, something caught Mia's eye. A faint glow flickered between the trees like a lantern's light, but it was cold, unnatural. The trees parted slightly, revealing a narrow path leading deeper into the forest, bathed in the eerie light. "That wasn't there before," Mia whispered, her eyes narrowing in confusion. The path seemed to beckon them, the glow flickering like a siren's call. "It's coming from the heart of the forest," Hannah said, her voice low, almost reverent. "It's leading us somewhere." "We can't follow it," Caleb protested, his voice thick with fear. "That's exactly what it wants us to do. The forest, it's not safe. We don't even know what's in there." Mia glanced back at the mansion, still standing tall on the hill, its windows dark like it was watching them. But the path in front of her, so inviting yet so ominous, seemed to hold the answer. She had to know. They all had to know what lay at the center of this nightmare. "We need to go," Mia said, her voice steady with determination. "Whatever is in there, whatever is controlling Jack, we're going to find it. We're going to stop it." They moved toward the path, the trees closing in as the forest seemed to hum with energy, its darkened branches swaying like they were guiding them forward. The closer they got to the glowing light, the more oppressive the air became. It felt as though the forest was tightening its grip around them, squeezing them with invisible hands. As they entered the path, the air grew colder, the light brighter, until it led them to a small clearing, at the center of which stood a massive, ancient tree. Its gnarled roots twisted in every direction, and its bark was blackened, as though scorched by some infernal fire. But it was the symbols carved into its trunk that made Mia's breath catch in her throat. The markings were unlike anything she had ever seen, a mix of strange symbols and runes, pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. "This is it," Mia whispered. "This is where it all started." She stepped forward, instinctively reaching out to touch the symbols, when suddenly the ground beneath them trembled once more, and a voice echoed through the clearing. "You shouldn't have come." The voice seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere all at once a low, guttural growl that shook the very air around them. The ground cracked open beneath their feet, and the air was thick with the smell of rot and decay. Dark shapes began to move in the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly as they stepped from the darkness, forming a circle around the group. Suspense. The forest now feels alive, its ancient power awakened. The ground cracks, and dark shapes begin to emerge, closing in on the group. This is the heart of the curse, where the ritual began and where the key to their escape, or their doom, lies. The group stood frozen, their fear palpable. The entities emerging from the shadows were no longer just part of the haunted forest. They were the forest. The twisted, deformed shapes were the spirits of those who had come before, their forms bound to the land by the cursed tree. And standing at the center of it all was the figure that had been haunting their every step, the one who had been pulling them toward this moment. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a sentient force, a living being with a will of its own, and it was hungry. "We have to fight," Mia said, her voice trembling but fierce. "Whatever this is, whatever it wants, it's not going to take us, not without a fight." With that, the group steeled themselves, their survival instincts kicking in as they prepared to face whatever darkness lay in the heart of the forest. The rituals, the spirits, the house, it all pointed to this moment, the final confrontation between them and the force that had been consuming them. The forest felt alive. Every rustle, every whisper, every shift in the air felt deliberate, as if the trees themselves were watching and waiting. Mia and the group had arrived at the center of the forest, standing at the base of the ancient tree. The symbols carved into its trunk pulsed with an eerie glow, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like tendrils of dark energy. The creatures that had emerged from the shadows were circling around them now, closing in, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The air had thickened, the smell of earth and decay mingling with the overwhelming sense of dread. The very ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet, and then, as if the forest itself had called upon her, Hannah staggered back, her breath shallow and quick. A rush of cold air washed over her, and her eyes darted wildly from one tree to the next, as if searching for something. No, someone. The whispers that had been barely audible now filled her mind, growing louder, more distinct. Her vision blurred, and suddenly the forest around her faded into something else, something far older, far darker. Hannah's knees buckled and she fell to the ground, her hands gripping the earth as if trying to ground herself. The whispers in her head intensified, and she saw it. The mansion, standing tall amidst a field of withered trees, its windows glowing with an unnatural light. Figures moved within, their faces twisted in anguish. The mansion was no longer just a building. It was a prison for souls trapped in an eternal loop, and Hannah could feel them, each one pressing against her mind. "No," she whispered, clutching her head as though trying to shut out the visions. But it was too late. A figure stepped forward, a woman with hollow eyes and a face twisted in agony. The woman's voice echoed in Hannah's mind, so clear, so real. "You shouldn't have come," Hannah gasped, her breath ragged as the world around her spun. The woman's voice seemed to reverberate within her, each word digging deeper into her soul. "You are part of it now. The forest, the mansion, they are bound together. It's not just the house that is cursed. It is the land itself." The vision shifted, and suddenly the mansion was alive, its walls breathing, its heart beating. It wasn't just a house. It was a living entity, feeding off the souls that entered it, drawing them deeper with each passing moment. The ritual that had been performed centuries ago had bound the spirits of the forest, the mansion, and the land into a twisted symbiosis. The forest had always been part of it. The house had been built upon an ancient burial ground, but it wasn't just the dead who were trapped. It was the living, too, who would become part of the curse, part of the eternal loop. Why? Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her face. Why are you showing me this? The woman's eyes locked onto hers, the pain in her expression a mirror of the suffering that had been buried beneath the house. You're not here by accident. The house has chosen you, chosen all of you. Hannah recoiled, her head spinning. The forest around her began to close in, the shadows deepening, the whispers becoming a deafening cacophony. Her breath quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the house's curse pressing down on her, suffocating her. Her vision swam, the earth beneath her shaking with the weight of ancient power. And then, as if someone had ripped her from the vision, Hannah was back in the clearing, gasping for air. The group had gathered around her, their faces filled with concern and fear. "Mia," she whispered, barely able to speak. "We have to get out of here. We can't stay in this place any longer." Mia rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Hannah, what happened? Are you okay?" But Hannah's eyes were wide with terror, her gaze darting toward the massive tree at the center of the clearing. The glowing symbols seemed to pulse, feeding off her fear, and she could feel the pull of the forest, drawing her closer to it. "I saw the mansion," Hannah said, her voice hoarse. "I saw everything. The house isn't just haunted, Mia. It's alive. It feeds on the souls that enter it. The ritual, the one that bound the house to the land, it wasn't just for the dead. It's for all of us. We're part of it now." Her words hung in the air like an omen. The weight of the truth settled over them, and the group felt it. This wasn't just some isolated incident. It wasn't just about a haunted mansion. This was something much darker, much older. The house was alive, and it had a hold on them now. "We have to break the curse," Mia said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We need to get to the mansion, now. We can't just run anymore, we have to finish this." But as they began to turn back toward the mansion, the ground shook beneath their feet again, and a loud crack sounded through the clearing. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind the tree, emerging from the shadows. It was Jack, or at least it looked like him. The group froze, their blood running cold as the figure approached. But there was something wrong with him. His movements were jerky, unnatural. His eyes were still wide and glassy, his expression frozen in that grotesque grin. The air around him seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy, and the ground beneath him seemed to ripple as if reality itself was bending around him. "Jack!" Mia called out, her voice barely above a whisper, but Jack's head jerked toward them, and he opened his mouth, but instead of Jack's voice, it was something else. A deep, resonant growl like an animal or something far worse. "Leave." The voice wasn't his. It was the voice of the forest, of the ancient power that had been feeding on them all along. The figure that had once been Jack raised his hand, and as he did, the ground around them began to crack open, dark tendrils of energy spilling out from the earth. The group stepped back, their fear growing. This wasn't Jack anymore. Whatever had taken him was not going to let them leave. Not unless they faced whatever had taken hold of him, and whatever was controlling the mansion. "Leave," the figure repeated, his voice now echoing with a power that shook the air around them. The trees began to shift, their branches creaking as though they were alive, their limbs reaching for the group. The air in the clearing was thick with tension, the forest humming with a malignant energy that seemed to wrap itself around the group, suffocating them. The twisted figure that had once been Jack was standing before them, its unnatural form, an embodiment of the ancient evil that had taken root in the mansion and the land itself. The air around him seemed to warp and flicker like a mirage, as if the fabric of reality itself was bending under the weight of whatever had consumed him. "Jack," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't bring herself to believe that this hollow-eyed, jerking creature was the friend she had known. "Please, snap out of it." The figure stood silent, his head tilting to one side, the grotesque grin still stretched across his face. His eyes, once full of life and humor, were now black voids, empty, soulless and cold. "He's gone," Hannah whispered, stepping back. "This isn't Jack anymore. It's something else, something that the forest, that the house has made him into." But Mia couldn't give up. Jack had been her closest friend, her confidant. She couldn't just let go. "Jack, please!" Her voice cracked, the desperation in it palpable. "We can help you, we can—" Without warning, the figure's head snapped toward her, its grin widening. And then, in a voice that was distorted, hollow and unrecognizable, Jack's voice echoed through the trees. "Leave. You should never have come. You are all mine now." The words sent a chill through Mia's spine. The forest seemed to respond, the trees groaning as if agreeing with the dark words. The ground shook once more, as if the very earth itself was alive, hungry. The air grew colder, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on their chests. Jack, or whatever he had become, raised his hand, and as he did, the ground cracked open beneath their feet. Black tendrils of energy erupted from the earth, twisting and writhing like serpents. The clearing was now filled with dark energy, and the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees now towering like prison walls. "Jack!" Mia shouted, taking a step toward him. "Fight it. Fight whatever this is." For a split second, the figure that had once been Jack seemed to hesitate. His eyes flickered, the faintest glimmer of recognition flashing across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The figure's body jerked again, as if resisting the pull of some otherworldly force, but the forest tightened its grip. "No!" Caleb cried out. "We can't stay here, it's too late for him." Hannah, trembling, stepped forward, her face pale and strained. "Mia, he's not coming back. We have to stop this. If we don't do something, we'll all be consumed by this place too." But Mia couldn't accept it. Her heart refused to let go, refused to admit that Jack, her closest friend, was lost to whatever darkness had taken over him. She looked at the figure standing before her, the twisted remnants of her friend, and something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to leave him to this fate. "No!" she shouted. "We won't let you have him. We'll break this curse no matter what it takes." And that was when the earth beneath them rumbled again, more violently this time. The figure, Jack, moved forward, his limbs jerking unnaturally as the tendrils of dark energy surged around him like a storm. The ground began to crack open, revealing dark, churning energy below. "We need to act now," Hannah cried. "Whatever happens, we can't wait any longer. The mansion is the key, it's the heart of the curse." Mia's heart sank. The realization hit her all at once. They were running out of time. The curse was unraveling them one piece at a time. It had already taken Jack. If they didn't do something, they would all be lost. "Let's go," Mia said, her voice filled with a renewed sense of urgency. "We have to get to the mansion now." The group turned and fled, the trees seemingly parting to allow their passage, but the darkness of the forest seemed to follow them. Every footfall echoed in the stillness, as though the forest itself was listening, waiting, and it wasn't going to let them leave easily. As they ran, the figure, Jack, remained standing in the clearing, his head tilted upward, his eyes unblinking. The cursed land, the forest, the mansion, it all seemed to pulse with a dark rhythm, like the beating heart of some monstrous creature. The mansion loomed ahead, the once stately building now twisted and distorted, as if the curse had corrupted it from within. The doors that had once been welcoming were now gaping like the jaws of a beast, dark and open. The windows were shattered, the glass reflecting the dull, muted light of the stormy sky above. "We're almost there," Caleb said, his voice tense. "We can break this. We just have to get inside." But as they neared the mansion, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The mansion seemed to grow, stretching and warping like it was coming to life. The trees behind them swayed and bent, their branches now like claws reaching for them, as if the forest was trying to pull them back. "It's not going to let us in," Hannah whispered, her voice strained. "The house won't let us leave. It's too strong." Mia stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no turning back now. The mansion had been built upon this cursed land, its foundation rooted in the ancient power that had taken hold of the forest. The house was the curse, and the only way to break it, to free Jack, to free themselves, was to confront whatever was at the heart of this nightmare. Mia took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she turned to face the others. "We can't stop now. We have to break the curse. We have to destroy what's inside." They nodded in unison, fear and resolve flashing in their eyes. Together they stepped into the mansion, crossing the threshold as the door slammed shut behind them with a loud, echoing thud. The door to the mansion slammed shut behind them with a final, almost deafening crash, as if the house itself had sealed their fate. Mia, Hannah, Caleb and Emma stood in the dimly lit entryway, the cold air swirling around them. The mansion's interior was even more oppressive than it had seemed from the outside. The walls, once grand, now looked faded and cracked, and the once beautiful tapestries lining the hall had long since turned to dust. The scent of decay lingered in the air, thick and musty. As they stepped deeper into the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. Every footstep seemed to echo through the vast, empty corridors, and the floor beneath their feet creaked as if the house itself was groaning under the weight of time. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally, as if someone was lurking just beyond their line of sight. "We need to find the source," Mia whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "The heart of the curse. It's the only way to stop this," Emma nodded, her face pale. "But where do we even start? The house, well, it's like a maze." Hannah, still shaken from the visions she had experienced in the forest, glanced around nervously. "The house, it feels alive. I can't shake the feeling that it's watching us." "It's not just watching us," Caleb said, his voice grim. "It's feeding on us. The longer we stay here, the more it pulls us in." There was a moment of silence as the weight of his words sank in. They were no longer just dealing with a haunted house. They were dealing with a living entity, one that fed on fear and suffering. The mansion was the epicenter of the curse, and they had stepped into its jaws. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, a sound that startled them all. They spun toward the sound, but the hallway was empty, the shadows deepening as if swallowing the light around them. "What the hell was that?" Mia whispered. Before anyone could answer, the floor beneath them trembled. The air seemed to grow, thicker, heavier, as if the mansion was reacting to their presence. The low hum of energy that had been present in the forest seemed to follow them inside, vibrating through the walls and the floor, growing louder with each passing moment. "We're not alone," Hannah said, her voice strained. "It's not just the house. There's something else here." Caleb looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Hannah's eyes widened as she looked down the hallway, her breath catching in her throat. "I saw something. I saw something move." Before she could explain, another sound echoed through the mansion. It was faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but then it grew louder, a low, mournful cry that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The sound sent a chill through their spines, and they instinctively huddled closer together. The cry intensified, becoming more urgent, more desperate. And then it stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. "We need to keep Moving, Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. We don't have much time. Without another word, they began to move deeper into the house, their footsteps slow and hesitant. The mansion seemed to stretch on endlessly, each hallway leading to more darkness, more shadows, more rooms that they couldn't fully see. It was as if the house itself was designed to disorient them, to trap them in its winding, never-ending maze. They reached a large, ornate door at the end of a long hallway. The door was cracked open, as though it had been waiting for them to arrive. Mia's heart raced as she stepped forward, pushing the door open with a creak. The room beyond was dark, the windows covered in thick, heavy curtains that blocked out the light. But as they entered, the temperature seemed to drop, and the air felt suffocating. The room was filled with old furniture, dusty chairs, tables covered in cobwebs, and a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. But it was the figure standing in front of the mirror that caught their attention. It was Jack, but not Jack as they had known him. He was standing still, his back to them, staring into the mirror with an expressionless face. His clothes were ragged, torn, and his skin was deathly pale. His once vibrant eyes were now clouded and lifeless, like empty pools of darkness. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. "Jack," Mia whispered, her voice trembling as she stepped forward. "Jack, it's me. Please, snap out of it." But there was no response. Jack remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the mirror, his body rigid, as if he were locked in place by some unseen force. "Jack!" Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. "Come on, man! We're here to help you." Still, there was no answer. Then, without warning, the mirror flickered, and the reflection of Jack twisted, distorted, as if something beneath the surface was struggling to break free. The glass warped, the reflection melting and reshaping into a grotesque version of Jack, his eyes wide and staring, his mouth open in a silent scream. Mia stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. What is this? What's happening to him? The reflection in the mirror seemed to shift again, and for a moment Mia thought she saw something in the glass behind Jack. Something dark, something moving. A shadow, a figure. She couldn't tell. And then, without warning, Jack's reflection reached out from the mirror. His hand shot forward, and before anyone could react, the air was filled with a sharp, unnatural scream. Jack's body lurched, and suddenly he was no longer standing in front of the mirror. He was gone. "Jack!" Mia cried, spinning around in panic. Where did he go? Where is he? But there was no sign of him in the room. The air was still, the mirror once again reflecting only the empty room behind them. The group stood frozen, the silence deafening, and then from behind them came a voice. "Leave!" The group stood frozen in the mirror-filled room, the air thick with terror. Jack was gone. The reflection of him had twisted and vanished, leaving nothing but the cold, empty glass. And yet, the oppressive feeling in the room hadn't lifted. The house seemed to breathe, shifting and pulsing, as though alive and aware of their every move. Mia's heart was pounding in her chest. She felt a deep, primal fear settle over her, like the weight of the entire mansion was pressing down on them, its dark presence suffocating. "Where did he go?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as she turned to face the others. Caleb was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with fear. "It's like the house swallowed him. It's not just a haunted place, it's a trap." Hannah, trembling, clutched the journal she had found earlier, the ancient pages still fresh in her hands despite the dust and decay around them. "We need to find the source. This isn't just a haunting. There's something here, a ritual, something that tied the house to the forest, to the land. If we don't break it, we'll end up like Jack, trapped." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice shaking with fear. "What's going on here?" Why did it take Jack? Why are we still here? The mansion, Hannah began, her voice thick with dread. It wasn't just built on cursed land. It was created to anchor the curse. There was a ritual, a dark ritual performed here, long ago. The house, the forest, the land, it's all connected. The spirits here, the ones who are trapped, they're bound to the house by that ritual. Bound? Caleb asked, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? Hannah's fingers trembled as she flipped through the journal, showing them an illustration of an ancient altar in the center of a forest clearing. The tree symbol appeared, again the one they had seen in the forest, the one carved into the mansion's walls. This tree, Hannah said, pointing to the illustration, it's not just a symbol, it's a key. The ritual was meant to bind the souls of the dead to the house. But what they didn't realize was that the ritual also fed the land. The spirits aren't just trapped here, they feed the curse, keeping the house alive, keeping the forest growing, keeping the cycle going. What cycle? Mia asked, feeling a chill crawl down her spine. The cycle of torment, Hannah continued. Those who enter the house, those who get close enough to the mansion, they become part of the ritual. Their souls are trapped, feeding the curse, keeping it alive. The only way to break the curse is to destroy the source, the heart of the ritual, and that's what's inside the house. But how do we break it? Mia asked, desperation creeping into her voice. What do we need to do? The ritual, Hannah said, her voice trembling with the weight of the words, requires a sacrifice. It needs a living soul, someone to sever the bond between the house, the forest, and the curse itself. That's why the house took Jack. It needs someone to complete the ritual, to be the sacrifice. And what happens if we don't stop it? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If we don't stop it, Hannah said, looking them all in the eyes, then we'll all become part of the house. Trapped forever. The room fell silent. The enormity of what they were facing, the weight of the decision ahead of them, hung in the air like a dark cloud. The mansion, the curse, the spirits, it was all leading to this moment, and there was no turning back. Mia's mind raced. She thought of Jack, how he had been taken. She thought of the screams that echoed through the forest, the dark energy that pulsed within the mansion. It was clear now. The house had been waiting for them. It had drawn them in one by one, knowing that they would be its next victims. The only way out was to confront it, to break the ritual, to destroy the source, and to free the trapped souls, including Jack's. We have to stop it, Mia said, her voice steady with resolve. We have to break the ritual no matter what. Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. But where do we even start? How do we stop this? Hannah flipped through the journal, her fingers trembling as she traced the symbols and notes written in ancient script. Finally, she stopped on a page, her eyes narrowing. There's a hidden chamber beneath the house. It's where the ritual was originally performed. We have to go there. The heart of the curse, Caleb muttered, his face pale. I don't like this, but I guess we don't have a choice. They all turned toward the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silent mansion. The air grew heavier, the temperature dropping as they made their way down the winding corridors. The mansion seemed to shift, the walls closing in as if it were alive, trying to trap them inside. Do you hear that? Mia whispered, her voice shaky as she glanced over her shoulder. At first, it was nothing more than a low hum, a vibration in the air. But then, as they moved deeper into the house, the sound grew louder, clearer, like whispers, like voices calling from the darkness. The walls seemed to hum with energy, and the very floor beneath them seemed to throb, as if the house itself were alive, feeding on their fear. I don't like this, Caleb muttered, his hand clenched around the journal. Something's wrong. I feel like we're walking straight into its mouth. Mia glanced at him, her heart heavy with fear. We have to. It's the only way to stop this. They arrived at a small, decrepit door hidden at the far end of the mansion's basement, concealed behind a rotting bookshelf. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the low hum of energy seemed to resonate from beneath the floor. Hannah stepped forward and pushed open the door, revealing a spiral staircase that led down into the darkness. The stairwell was narrow, the walls slick with moisture, and the air smelled of earth and damp wood. The light from their flashlights flickered as they descended, the steps creaking beneath their weight. At the bottom of the stairs they found a large chamber. An altar stood at the center, surrounded by symbols carved into the stone floor. The air was thick with the presence of something ancient, something powerful, and as they entered the chamber, the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse like a beating heart. In the center of the altar, a single dark stone stood. It hummed with power, and as Mia stepped closer, she could feel the curse radiating from it, seeping into her skin like a poison. "It's here," Hannah whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. This is where it all started. The stone was the key, the heart of the curse, and to break it, to stop the mansion from consuming them all, one of them would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. The chamber was suffocating, the air thick with dread and anticipation. The dark stone at the center of the altar pulsed with a malevolent energy, and the whispers that had been haunting the house grew louder, more insistent. The room felt alive, as if the very walls and floor were watching them, waiting for them to make a choice. Mia stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, each breath a struggle against the rising tide of panic and fear. The curse, the mansion, the spirits, they were all converging here in this moment, and they were waiting for her to decide. Someone has to break the curse. Hannah's voice broke through the heavy silence. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and determination. She was standing just a few steps from the altar, her gaze fixed on the pulsing stone. "It's the only way to save us all." Mia turned to her, her chest tightening. "I know, but who?" Caleb was standing by the doorway, his face pale. He was gripping the journal tightly, his knuckles white. "We all came here together," he said, his voice strained. "We all have to leave together. No one should have to make that kind of sacrifice. We should find another way." "I wish there was another way," Mia whispered. "But there isn't. This is it. This is what the house wants." The stone at the center of the altar seemed to hum louder in response, as if it were feeding off their uncertainty. The low whispers that had filled the house were now an overwhelming cacophony in Mia's mind, pulling at her thoughts, urging her to make the decision. "We don't have much time," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. She had been standing near the back of the room, her hands trembling as she looked at the others. "If we don't stop it now, we'll never get out. The house, it's growing stronger. It won't let us leave." Mia's thoughts raced. She had to make a choice, but how could she? How could anyone? "We can't let the house win," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've lost Jack. We can't lose anyone else." Hannah stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "I've been thinking about this since we found the journal. The ritual. It requires someone to sever the bond. The stone. It feeds on our fear, our pain. If we don't act, we'll all be swallowed by it." Mia swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Someone has to make the sacrifice. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about survival, it was about breaking the cycle, stopping the curse from continuing, and setting the spirits trapped in the house free. "I'll do it," Mia said, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes were wide, the words trembling in her throat. but the truth had finally become clear. It had to be her. It was the only way to stop the house, to save everyone else. What? Caleb's voice cracked with disbelief. No, Mia. You can't. There has to be another way. Mia shook her head, her eyes steady. There isn't. I understand now. I've been holding on to hope, hoping there was another way, but there's not. This is the only way we can break the curse. Mia, Hannah said softly, stepping forward. We can't lose you. I'm not going to lose you, Mia replied, her voice trembling but firm. I'm going to make sure that we get out of here. She looked at each of them, her heart aching as she saw the fear in their eyes. But she knew, deep down, that this was the only choice they had. The curse wouldn't stop until it had claimed them all. And if she didn't make this sacrifice, the house would continue to feed. It would grow stronger, and it would claim more souls. The stone in the center of the altar seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heart, its dark energy swirling around her. Mia stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. The whispers in her mind intensified, urging her to make the final decision. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again. The walls of the mansion groaned, and the air felt thick with dark energy. The house was pushing back, trying to stop them from completing the ritual. The floor began to crack, and a low rumble echoed through the chamber, as if the mansion itself was fighting to keep them trapped. We don't have much time, Emma said, her voice filled with desperation. Mia, please, we can't let this happen. I don't have a choice, Mia whispered. She took a deep breath, and with one final, steadying exhale, she stepped closer to the altar. The moment her hand touched the stone, the mansion seemed to shake with fury. A piercing scream echoed through the chamber, and the walls began to crack. The stone beneath her fingers felt like it was burning with cold, unholy fire. Mia's body trembled as the energy of the curse surged around her, pulling her deeper into its grasp. But she didn't back away. She closed her eyes, her mind focusing on the memory of her friends, the people she loved, the ones she had come to save. And she let go. She surrendered to the stone, to the curse, to the ritual. For a moment, everything went still. The air seemed to freeze, and the world around her faded into darkness. The whispers stopped. Then, there was a sharp, blinding pain, a tearing sensation as if her very soul was being ripped from her body. She gasped, but there was no sound, no air. It was like she was drowning in the darkness. The energy of the house surged through her, filling every part of her with the coldness of the curse, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The pain faded, and Mia felt weightless, as though she was floating in an endless void. For a moment, she thought she might be dead, but then slowly, she opened her eyes. The mansion had gone silent. The air was no longer thick with malevolent energy. The weight that had pressed down on them since the moment they had entered had lifted. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive presence of the house had vanished. Mia looked around, her body still trembling from the immense force that had just flowed through her. She felt different, like something deep inside her had shifted. And then she saw her friends. Hannah, Caleb, and Emma were standing in the chamber, their faces filled with disbelief, but their eyes were clear. The house no longer seemed to loom over them. It had lost its power. Caleb began, but his voice faltered as he looked at Mia. Mia, Mia smiled weakly, feeling her strength returning. We did it. The curse is broken. We're free. The mansion, once a place of torment and despair, seemed to breathe its last, its power finally fading away. The oppressive atmosphere that had filled the house for so long had lifted, leaving behind only a silence that felt peaceful, freeing. The curse was broken. Mia had made the ultimate sacrifice, but in doing so, she freed the spirits trapped within the house and forest, and ended the cycle of torment that had plagued the land for so long. The house, no longer feeding on fear and suffering, had crumbled, its grip broken forever. The group, now free from the curse, could finally escape the mansion, knowing that they had faced the darkness and triumphed. The mansion was silent now. The oppressive air that had once pressed down on them had lifted, replaced by a strange, almost peaceful stillness. The ground beneath them no longer trembled with the weight of the curse, and the darkness that had clouded the house was gone. Mia stood in the center of the chamber, her breath still ragged from the immense power that had surged through her, but she felt a quiet sense of triumph wash over her. The curse was broken, the ritual was complete, and they were free. But as the group slowly approached her, their faces filled with disbelief, gratitude, and grief, Mia felt something stir within her. A feeling she couldn't quite place. "Mia, we did it," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You did it." Mia nodded slowly, her chest tightening as she turned, her gaze toward the others, Hannah, Emma, and Caleb, their faces reflecting the same mixture of relief and sorrow. They had all come so far. They had all faced their worst fears. And now, they were free. Free from the house, free from the curse that had bound them to it. But as she stood there, something gnawed at her. There was something she couldn't shake. Subtle unease that began to creep into her thoughts. Something wasn't right. The house, though silent, still felt alive. The walls, the floors, the very structure of it. It felt like it was breathing, as though the mansion was holding on to something. Something it wasn't willing to let go of. "Mia?" Hannah's voice broke through her thoughts, and Mia turned to face her. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Mia whispered, forcing a smile, though it felt hollow. "I'm fine. We all are." But as she spoke those words, a low hum began to fill the air. It was faint at first, like a distant vibration, but then it grew louder, darker. The mansion's walls seemed to pulse, as though the house was reacting to their presence. The dark energy that had once been so overpowering was creeping back, seeping from the walls, the floors, and the very air itself. "Mia," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "What's happening? I thought it was over." "It's not," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not over, it's still here." The hum grew louder, more insistent, like the house was awakening from a deep slumber. The air thickened, and a cold wind swept through the chamber, blowing dust and debris into the air. The walls began to crack and warp, and the floor trembled beneath their feet. "No," Mia whispered, taking a step back. "We've done everything. The ritual should have ended it. The curse should be broken." But as she spoke, she felt it. The dark presence that had filled the mansion for so long was returning, but not in the same way. This time, it wasn't just the spirits of the house that had been freed. It was something far darker, something more powerful. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, and Mia whipped around, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure of a woman, tall and skeletal, stood at the threshold of the chamber. Her eyes were hollow, her face twisted in agony. She was the same woman Hannah had seen in her visions, the one who had warned them. "You shouldn't have come." The figure stepped forward, and the walls seemed to bend around it. The mansion groaned in protest as the figure moved, as if it, too, were part of the house, part of the curse. The woman's voice echoed in their minds, filling the chamber. "You cannot escape." The air around them grew thick with a sense of foreboding. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in, the dark energy twisting into a thick, suffocating fog that clung to everything. The woman's form flickered in and out of existence, her face now filled with rage. She was no longer just a spectre. She was the source, the true heart of the curse that had haunted the mansion. Mia felt the ground beneath her feet crack open, and suddenly the mansion began to consume everything around them. The floor buckled and the walls twisted in unnatural ways, warping the room into a nightmarish reflection of itself. The mansion was trying to pull them back, to swallow them whole. "We need to go!" Caleb shouted, his voice breaking with panic. But as they turned to flee, the door at the far end of the chamber slammed shut with a deafening bang. The house had locked them in. The curse hadn't been broken, it had only changed. "We're trapped," Hannah cried out, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to get out of here!" Mia turned back toward the altar, the dark stone still pulsing with ominous energy. The woman's form was shifting, distorting, becoming something else, something darker. A black mist rose from her figure, swirling around them like a storm. The house, alive with dark power, was reaching out to consume them all. "Leave," the woman's voice whispered in their minds, and the words felt like ice, like death. But Mia wasn't going to run. Not this time. She had already faced the darkness. She had already sacrificed everything to break the curse. And now she had one final chance to end it once and for all. "No," Mia said, her voice steady with newfound strength. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the figure of the woman. "I won't let you win." With that, Mia rushed toward the altar, the dark energy swirling around her. The house seemed to fight against her, the walls bending and cracking, the floor trembling beneath her feet. The woman screamed, a chilling sound that rattled the very air, but Mia didn't stop. She had come too far to give up now. The dark stone at the center of the altar pulsed violently as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact, the ground beneath her cracked open, and a blinding light erupted from the stone. The woman's form screeched in agony, her face twisted in torment. "Mia!" "No!" Hannah screamed, but Mia couldn't stop. She had to finish this. With one final, resolute push, Mia let go of everything. The light from the stone exploded outward, flooding the room with a brilliance so pure that it drowned out the darkness. The house screamed in defiance, but it was too late. The curse shattered. The mansion, once alive with malevolent energy, began to crumble. The walls cracked, splintered, the floors buckling beneath the force of the breaking curse. The dark figure of the woman disintegrated into dust, her screams echoing in the air until they faded away into nothing. And then there was silence. Chatsua opened her eyes, her body trembling, but she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The air had cleared, the oppressive weight of the curse was gone, and the house, the mansion, had finally fallen silent. We did it," Caleb said, his voice filled with disbelief. The others standing beside her looked around in awe, realizing that the house had lost its grip on them. The darkness had lifted. The mansion was collapsing, its structure falling apart as if the curse was unraveling the very foundation that had held it together. The ground began to shift beneath their feet, and the door to the outside swung open, allowing the first light of dawn to filter through. "Mia," Hannah said, her voice choked with emotion, "we're free." Mia looked around at her friends, Hannah, Caleb, and Emma, each one of them now safe. The weight of the last few days, the horrors they had endured, and the ultimate sacrifice she had made to save them all seemed to lift from her shoulders. With a final glance at the crumbling mansion, Mia turned toward the door. The curse was broken. The house was finally defeated. They stepped into the light of the morning, the first rays of the sun shining down on them. The curse that had haunted the mansion for so long was finally shattered, and the house, once alive with dark energy, had crumbled. Mia's sacrifice, her final confrontation with the source of the curse, had ended the nightmare. The group, now free, could leave the mansion behind and begin to heal, knowing they had faced their fears and triumphed. As they walked away from the ruins of the mansion, the ground trembled once more, faint, almost imperceptible. A whisper in the wind, too quiet to be heard clearly, echoed from the depths of the crumbling house. Is it truly over? But for now, they were free.